Hello everyone, welcome back to Midnight Lullaby. I know many of you are here to drift gently into sleep. Before you close your eyes, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Let me know where in the world you're listening from. Now, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let the story carry you into dreams. Story 1. The cat came into my life on the worst night of the worst year I'd ever lived. I found her, or she found me. I was never quite sure. Huddled beside the dumpster behind my apartment building, black as midnight, with eyes that reflected the street light in a way that made them look almost gold. She was small under fade, and when she looked at me, I felt something twist in my chest. I'd always been a practical man. Not cruel exactly, but not sentimental either. I didn't believe in fate or karma or any of that nonsense. But that night, drunk and angry, after losing my job, after the fight with my girlfriend, to watching my carefully constructed life crumble like sand, I bent down and picked up that cat. Move, Shadow. I snapped, more harshly than I'd intended. I was stressed, worried about the presentation I had to give, and she was in my way. She didn't move, just sat there, a black statue, those gold eyes fixed on mine. I said move. I nudged her with my foot. Not a kick, not really. Just a push to get her out of the way. She hissed. The first sound I'd ever heard her make, and darted under the couch. I grabbed my file and left, already forgetting the incident before I reached the elevator. The day went well. Better than well, actually. My presentation was a success, and my boss hinted at a possible promotion. I stopped at a bar on the way home to celebrate. Had a few drinks with coworkers, basked in their congratulations and envy. I didn't get home until after midnight. Shadow was waiting for me in the hallway outside my apartment. Sitting perfectly still in the darkness, just her eyes visible. 2 gold coins floating in the black. Hey, girl, I said, my guilt about the morning returning with a sharp pang. Sorry about earlier. I was stressed. Let me make it up to you. I unlocked the door and went inside, expecting her to follow. She didn't. She just sat in the hallway, watching. I poured myself a drink and collapsed on the couch, exhausted and buzzed and satisfied with how the day had turned out. That's when I noticed the smell. Gas. Faint, but unmistakable. I stood up quickly, the alcohol haze clearing instantly. The smell was stronger near the kitchen. I checked the stove. All the burners were off. But the smell persisted, and as I leaned closer, I heard it, a faint hissing from one of the burners. The knob had been turned, just slightly. Not enough to produce a flame, but enough to release gas. How long had it been leaking? If I'd come home on time, at my usual hour, would I have noticed? Or would I have just collapsed on the couch and fallen asleep? The apartment slowly filling with gas. I turned it off, opened all the windows, and stood on my balcony breathing the cold night air until my hands stopped shaking. An accident, I told myself. The knob was old, finicky. I must have bumped it this morning without noticing. These things happened. Shadow finally came inside around 3 a.m. I was still awake, unable to sleep, jumping at every sound. She walked past me without acknowledgement and curled up on the chair across from the couch. In the darkness, I couldn't see her body, just those gold eyes, unblinking, watching. The second incident came 3 days later. I'd been working late, trying to finish a project before the deadline. It was past 10 when I finally left the office. The parking garage was nearly empty. My footsteps echoing off the concrete walls as I walked toward my car. I was halfway there when I heard footsteps behind me. Not echoes of my own steps, but someone else's, trying to match my rhythm, trying to stay hidden in the sound of my movement. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I started walking again, faster. The footsteps resumed, closer now. I broke into a run. My keys clutched between my fingers like a weapon. Behind me, the footsteps became heavier, faster, unmasked now by any pretense of stealth. I reached my car, fumbled with the keys, got the door open, and threw myself inside. Locked the doors. Started the engine. A man emerged from between 2 cars, his face twisted with frustration or anger. He was holding something. I couldn't see what, but the way he held it, low and purposeful, made my stomach drop. He approached my car. I threw it in reverse, not caring about the screech of tires, not caring about the damage I might do to the cars around me. Just moving, getting away, escaping. I drove home shaking. Took a different route, kept checking my rearview mirror for headlights following. When I finally pulled into my building's garage, I sat in the car for 15 minutes, making sure I was alone, making sure I was safe. Shadow was waiting by my apartment door. She stood up as I approached, and for a moment, in the dim hallway light, she seemed larger than she should be. Her shadow on the wall was wrong, too long, with angles that didn't match her body. Not tonight, I muttered, unlocking my door. I can't deal with weirdness tonight. She followed me inside and jumped onto the kitchen counter. Something she'd never done before. She sat there, perfectly still, watching me as I poured a drink with trembling hands. I almost died tonight, I told her, needing to say it out loud, needing to make it real. Someone was following me. If I hadn't run. She tilted her head, and in that gesture, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't curiosity or concern. It was satisfaction, like she'd known what would happen, like she'd expected it. "What are you?" I whispered. Her eyes reflected the kitchen light, turning from gold to a deeper color, almost red. She opened her mouth, not to meow, but in something that looked disturbingly like a smile. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I kept thinking about the gas leak, about the man in the parking garage, about the way Shadow watched me with those knowing eyes. Coincidences, my rational mind insisted. Bad luck. Things that happened in cities, to people who lived alone, who worked late, who... But another part of me, older and more primitive, whispered different words: payment, accounting, balance due. The third incident was the worst. I was driving home from the grocery store taking the route I always took when my brakes failed. One moment, I was slowing for a red light. The next, my foot was hitting the floor with no resistance, no response. The car continuing forward, as if I'd never pressed the pedal at all. I yanked the emergency brake. It did nothing. The car was accelerating, rolling downhill toward the busy intersection, ahead where cars were crossing, where people were walking, where disaster waited with open arms. I remember the clarity of those moments. The way time seemed to slow and expand. The way I could see each car in the intersection, each pedestrian, each point of potential impact. I remember thinking, this is how I die. I jerked the wheel, aiming for the only gap I could see. A narrow space between a delivery truck and the concrete barrier of the overpass. If I could thread that needle, if I could somehow slip through, I might have a chance. The side mirror clipped the truck. The car scraped along the barrier with a sound like the world ending. But I made it through. On the other side, the road curved upward, and the car finally began to slow. I steered onto the shoulder and came to a stop, my whole body shaking so hard I couldn't hold the wheel. The tow truck driver who came to pick up my car looked at the brake lines and whistled low. Completely severed, he said, "Clean cut," like someone took a blade to them. "You're lucky to be alive. Lucky." The word echoed in my head all the way home in the cab. Lucky. As if luck had anything to do with it. Shadow was waiting for me. Not by the door this time, but in the middle of my living room. Sitting on the coffee table, her tail wrapped neatly around her paws. The last rays of sunset came through the window, and in that light, I could finally see what I'd been too willfully blind to notice before. Her shadow on the wall behind her wasn't a cat's shadow. It was human, or humanoid at least, tall and angular, with 2 long limbs and a head that was wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. And it was moving independently, gesturing, reaching out, even as Shadow sat perfectly still. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "What are you?" But she didn't answer. Cats don't speak, after all. But she held my gaze with those gold, red eyes, and I understood. Not in words, but in a deep, cellular knowledge that bypassed language entirely. Debt must be paid. I'd saved her life that night 6 months ago. Picked her up when she was dying, fed her, sheltered her, given her a home. In doing so, I'd created an imbalance in the universe, a debt that demanded repayment. But I'd also been careless with that gift. I'd pushed her aside when she inconvenienced me. I'd treated her as an object, a possession, something to be moved when it was in my way. And in a universe that demanded balance, such treatment could not go unpunished. The disasters weren't random. They were accounting. Each brush with death, each narrow escape, was a bill coming due. The universe, or whatever force Shadow represented, was collecting payment for my carelessness, my casual cruelty, my assumption that saving something gave me the right to treat it however I wished. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't mean. I was just stressed. I didn't think." Shadow's tail twitched once. The gesture was dismissive, almost contemptuous. Intentions didn't matter. Actions did. Debt did. And the debt was not yet fully paid. I began to understand something else then, something that made my knees weak. The disasters had been escalating. Gas leak. Assault. Car accident. Each one worse than the last. Each one closer to actually killing me. Which meant the next one. "Please," I said. "I'll do better. But what could I do? How do you apologize to a force of nature? How do you make amends to something that exists outside normal rules of cause and effect?" Shadow wasn't really a cat. She was something older, something that predated human concepts of mercy or forgiveness. She was balance incarnate, and balance demanded its due. She jumped down from the table and walked toward my bedroom. At the doorway, she paused and looked back at me. It wasn't an invitation. It was a command. I followed. My bedroom looked exactly as I'd left it that morning. Bed made, curtains drawn, nothing out of place. Shadow jumped onto the bed and curled up in the center, in the exact spot where I usually slept. "I can't sleep there," I said. Her eyes fixed on mine, and the message was clear. "Yes, you can. Yes, you will." I was exhausted. The adrenaline from the car accident had drained away, leaving me hollow and shaking. I needed sleep desperately. But the thought of lying down next to Shadow, of closing my eyes while she watched, filled me with primal terror. I tried to stay awake. I made coffee, turned on all the lights, played music loudly. But exhaustion isn't something you can fight forever. Around 4 a.m., I finally stumbled to my bed and collapsed beside the small black shape of the cat. She shifted closer, curling against my chest, her warmth spreading through my shirt. It should have been comforting. It felt like lying next to a furnace, heat that was too intense, too purposeful. I closed my eyes. The dreams came immediately. Not dreams, really, visions. Memories that weren't mine. I saw myself from the outside, from Shadow's perspective. Saw myself finding her that night, picking her up, carrying her inside. But I also saw what I hadn't noticed then, the thing that had been chasing her. Something vast and hungry, made of empty space and malice, that had been hunting her through the city streets. Something she'd been running from when I'd found her. By taking her in, I'd saved her from that thing. But I'd also inherited the debt she owed it. The balance she'd upset by surviving when she should have died. The universe demanded equilibrium. Life saved must be paid for. Safety granted must be repaid. And I, in my ignorance and casual cruelty, had accepted that debt without understanding its terms. I saw other visions too. Other people who'd saved her in other times, other places. Shadow was old, so much older than any cat should be. She'd been saved dozens of times by dozens of people, and each time she'd brought with her the same debt, the same demand for balance. Most of her saviors had been kind. They'd treated her well, and when the time came for payment, they died peacefully in their sleep. The debt cleared, the balance restored. A life given for a life saved. Fair, equitable, clean. But some, like me, had been careless, had taken their good fortune for granted, had pushed her aside, ignored her, treated her as less than the gift she represented. And for them, the payment was different, harsher. The universe collected its debt through suffering before claiming the final price. I jerked awake, gasping, my heart pounding. The room was still dark. Shadow was still curled against my chest, purring softly. But now I could feel it. The wrongness of that purr, the way it resonated not just in her throat, but in the walls, the floor, the very air around us. She was part of the building now, part of my life, part of me. And she would be until the debt was paid in full. I got up and went to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face. In the mirror, my reflection looked haggard, aged. Had I always had that much gray in my hair? Those lines around my eyes. Shadow appeared in the doorway, a black silhouette against the darkness of the hallway. Her eyes caught the bathroom light, reflecting it back at me, and in that reflection I saw the countdown, not in numbers, but in certainty. 3 incidents, 3 near misses, 3 chances to survive. The 4th would be final. I knew it with the same cellular certainty I'd felt before. The pattern was clear. The escalation inevitable. The next disaster would be the one I didn't escape, the one that balanced the books once and for all. When? I asked my reflection, my voice barely a whisper. When does it happen? Shadow's tail twitched. Soon. The message was wordless but unmistakable. Soon. I stopped going to work. Called in sick, then just stopped calling at all. I knew my job was probably gone, but what did it matter? I couldn't focus on spreadsheets and meetings when I was waiting for death to arrive. I stayed in my apartment, watching Shadow, watching for signs of the coming disaster. I checked the smoke detectors obsessively, unplugged every appliance, threw away anything that could conceivably cause harm. I ordered food for delivery and inspected each meal like I was searching for poison. Shadow watched my paranoia with what I can only describe as amusement. She would sit on the windowsill, silhouetted against the daylight, and I could see her shadow on the wall behind her. That wrong humanoid shape, gesturing in what might have been laughter. A week passed. Then 2. Nothing happened. No gas leaks, no attacks, no accidents. Just endless waiting, endless watching, endless fear. I began to wonder if maybe I'd been wrong. If maybe the debt had been paid after all, if the near misses had been enough. Maybe I could go back to my life, back to normal, back to pretending that cats were just cats and the universe didn't keep accounts. That's when it happened. I was in the kitchen, making coffee, when Shadow jumped onto the counter. She walked to the edge and sat down, looking at me with those unblinking gold, red eyes. What? I asked, my hands shaking as I poured water into the coffee maker. What do you want? She didn't respond, just watched. Waited. I turned back to the coffee maker, pressed the button to start it brewing. There was a spark, a pop, then flames, sudden and bright and far too large. Spreading from the coffee maker to the curtains, to the cabinets, to everything flammable in reach. I grabbed for the fire extinguisher under the sink. It wasn't there. I'd removed it during my paranoid purge, convinced it might explode somehow, might cause the very disaster I was trying to prevent. The flames spread impossibly fast, as if they were alive, as if they had purpose. Smoke filled the kitchen, thick and black and choking. I stumbled backward, coughing, my eyes streaming. Shadow was still on the counter, sitting calmly in the center of the spreading flames. The fire touched her fur but didn't burn her. She was part of it, I realized. Part of the disaster. The agent of balance, collecting what was owed. I ran for the door. It was locked. The deadbolt had turned itself somehow, jammed in place. I couldn't open it. The windows. I could break the windows, climb out, escape to the fire escape. I grabbed a chair, swung it at the glass. The window didn't break, didn't even crack. I hit it again and again, but it was like hitting a wall, impervious and immovable. The smoke was getting thicker. I couldn't breathe. I dropped to the floor where the air was clearer, but I knew it wouldn't help for long. The apartment was becoming an oven, the flames consuming everything, the heat so intense I could feel my skin blistering. This was it. This was the fourth incident. The final payment. Through the smoke, I saw Shadow walking toward me. She moved through the flames like they were nothing, her small dark form perfectly composed, unhurried. She came and sat directly in front of me, so close I could have touched her if I'd dared. We looked at each other, predator and prey, creditor and debtor. "I'm sorry," I whispered, not sure if I was apologizing for pushing her that morning months ago, or for something larger, more fundamental. A, for the arrogance of thinking I could save something without consequence. For the hubris of assuming rescue came without cost. She blinked slowly. Once, twice, and in those gold-red eyes I saw something shift. Not forgiveness. She was beyond such human concepts. But perhaps understanding. Recognition that I'd learned the lesson. Paid attention to the teaching. Understood the fundamental law. All accounts must balance. The smoke was in my lungs now, burning, choking. My vision was going dark around the edges. I was dying. I knew it, accepted it. This was the price, and I would pay it, and the debt would be cleared. Shadow stood up, walked past me toward the door. Toward the door that had refused to open, that had been locked by forces I couldn't understand. She sat in front of it and meowed. The first time I'd heard her voice since that morning I'd pushed her aside. The deadbolt turned. The door swung open. Fresh air rushed in, and with it, the sound of sirens. Someone had called the fire department. Someone had noticed the smoke, the flames. Help was coming. Shadow looked back at me one last time. In that look, I understood the debt was paid. Not with my death, but with this moment, this choice. This mercy that wasn't mercy but something more complex, a calculation I couldn't fully understand. I crawled toward the door, toward the open air, toward life. Behind me, the flames roared, consuming my apartment, my possessions, everything I owned, but not me. Not quite yet. I made it to the hallway and collapsed, coughing, gasping. Neighbors were emerging from their apartments, voices raised in alarm. Someone pulled me further from the flames. Someone else was calling my name, asking if I was okay, if anyone else was inside. I tried to answer, but couldn't speak. Could only cough and shake and live, impossibly live. The firefighters arrived. They put out the flames, saved the building, treated me for smoke inhalation. The apartment was a total loss, they said. I was lucky to be alive. Lucky. That word again. Shadow was gone. I never saw her again, not in the ruins of my apartment, not in the shelter where I stayed for the next few weeks, not in the new place I eventually rented. She'd simply vanished, her work complete, the balance restored. Sometimes I still see black cats on the street. Each time, my heart skips, and I have to stop and look. Have to check those eyes to make sure they're just normal cat eyes and not gold, red, not knowing, not keeping accounts. I'm more careful now. With animals, with people, with every interaction. I understand what I didn't understand before. That everything has weight, everything tips some scale, everything demands eventual balance. Kindness isn't free. Cruelty isn't without cost. And the universe, patient and inexorable, always collects what's owed. I saved a life that night 6 months ago when I found Shadow by the dumpster. And in saving that life, I incurred a debt I didn't understand. The near deaths, the disasters, the escalating terror. All of it was payment. All of it was the universe balancing its books. But here's what keeps me awake now. What haunts me more than the memory of flames or the feeling of Shadow's weight on my chest. She could have let me die. She could have watched me burn, collected the final payment, closed the account permanently. Instead, she opened the door. Why? Why show mercy, if that's what it was? At the last moment, why let me live when the pattern, the escalation, the logic of it all pointed to death? I think I understand now, lying awake in my new apartment, listening to the sounds of the city outside. The debt wasn't just about my life. It was about my understanding. She needed me to learn the lesson, to truly comprehend the weight of what I'd done, the implications of my actions. Death would have been too easy, too clean, a closed book, an ended story. But this, surviving, remembering, knowing, this is the real payment. Living with the knowledge of how close I came. Understanding that every kindness carries weight. Every casual cruelty has consequences. Every life saved creates ripples that spread further than we can imagine. I carry that weight now, that knowledge. And in carrying it, I pay the debt every day, in every choice, in every interaction. The balance is maintained not through my death, but through my life, lived carefully, mindfully, with full awareness of the scales that invisibly weigh every action. Sometimes, late at night, I hear a sound in the darkness, a soft padding of paws, the faint jingle of a collar I never bought, and I wonder if Shadow is checking on me, making sure I remember the lesson, ensuring the debt stays paid. Or maybe she's just passing through. moving from one debtor to the next. A dark figure in the night, carrying an invisible ledger, keeping the universe's accounts in order. Either way, I'm grateful. Not for the terror, not for the near deaths, but for the understanding, for learning what so many never learn until it's too late. That we are all accountable for our actions, all responsible for the weight we carry, all debtors to a universe that always collects what it's owed. I don't have pets anymore. I don't save strays or feed feral cats or involve myself in the lives of creatures I don't fully understand. Not because I don't care, but because I care too much. Because I know now what it means to accept that responsibility, to take on that debt. And I know that somewhere in this city, on some dark street corner, Shadow is waiting. Waiting for the next person to find her, to save her, to take on the debt without understanding its terms. I wonder if they'll be kind to her. I wonder if they'll push her aside one careless morning, annoyed by her presence, ignorant of the accounts being kept. I wonder if they'll survive their payment. But mostly, I wonder if mercy, if that's what Shadow showed me, is part of the balance too. If in letting me live, she added another line to the ledger, another debt that will someday, somehow, need to be paid. The universe keeps its accounts. Shadow keeps her vigil. And I keep waking up each morning, grateful to be alive, terrified of what that gratitude might cost. Because in the end, all debts must be paid. All accounts must balance. And somewhere in the darkness, a black cat is watching. Her gold, red eyes reflecting a light that doesn't exist. Her shadow wrong on the wall behind her, waiting. Always waiting, always keeping score. You and me both, I muttered, thinking of her obvious hardship, seeing something of my own situation reflected in those strange gold eyes. Kicked to the curb. I took her upstairs, fed her. Named her Shadow because she seemed to be nothing but darkness given form. She ate delicately, never taking her eyes off me. And when she finished, she sat perfectly still and watched me drink myself into unconsciousness on my couch. That was 6 months ago. Things got better after Shadow came into my life. Not immediately, and not in any way I could directly attribute to the cat, but better nonetheless. I found a new job, better than the old one. Reconciled with my girlfriend. Then realized I was better off without her. My apartment, which had always felt temporary and cold, began to feel like home. Shadow was a perfect pet. Quiet, clean, independent. She never demanded attention, never scratched the furniture, never knocked things off shelves the way cats supposedly did. She simply existed in my space, a dark shape in corners, a warm presence on cold nights. Sometimes I would catch her watching me with those unsettling gold eyes, and I'd feel that same twist in my chest I'd felt the night I found her. But that was gratitude, I told myself. She was grateful I'd saved her, and I, in some strange way I didn't fully understand, was grateful she'd appeared when I needed something, anything, to care for other than my own spiraling misery. I should have known better. I should have remembered that all accounts must eventually be balanced, That debt, once incurred, must be paid. The first incident happened on a Tuesday. I'd been running late for work, rushing through my morning routine, when I remembered I'd left an important file on my coffee table. I turned to go back for it, and nearly tripped over Shadow, who had positioned herself directly in my path. Story 2. I've been blind for 7 years. Not from birth. That might have been easier. I remember colors, faces, sunlight. I remember what it was like to see, which makes the darkness harder to bear. But I've adapted. I've learned to navigate by sound and touch and smell. I've built a life in the dark. A small life, perhaps, but mine. The conference was in a city I'd never visited. My assistant had booked everything: flights, transportation, accommodation. The Adderley Hotel, she'd said. Small, historic, affordable. Perfect for a 3-day academic conference on medieval literature. She'd even arranged for someone to meet me at the airport, to guide me to the hotel, to make sure I was settled. But that person never showed. I waited at baggage claim for 40 minutes, listening to the announcements echo through the terminal, feeling the crowds flow around me like water around a stone. Finally, I took a taxi. I had the address. I had my cane. I would manage. The driver was silent during the ride. I tried to make conversation, asked about the city, the weather, landmarks we passed, but received only grunts in response. When we stopped, he said simply, "Adderley Hotel," and I heard him pop the trunk for my luggage. The air outside the taxi was cold and damp. Not the clean cold of winter, but something stale and clinging. I stood on the sidewalk, cane in one hand, suitcase in the other, and felt utterly alone. "Hello," I called out. "Is anyone there?" No answer. I heard the taxi pull away, its engine fading into the distance. Then silence. Not the comfortable silence of a quiet street, but an absence of sound so complete it made my ears ring. I tapped my way forward with my cane until I found steps. 3 of them, leading up to what I assumed was the hotel entrance. My hand found a door, and it opened at my touch. Not locked, not even latched properly. It swung inward with a creak that sounded like a question. "Hello," I called again, stepping into what I hoped was the lobby. "I have a reservation. Dr. Sarah Chen. I'm here for 3 nights. My voice echoed. The space sounded large, with high ceilings. The floor beneath my feet felt like old tile, cracked in places. The air smelled of dust and something else, something sweet and rotten that I couldn't quite identify. I waited, but no one came. No footsteps approaching. No cheerful greeting from a receptionist. Nothing. "This is ridiculous," I muttered, feeling along what seemed to be a wall. My hand found a surface. Wood paneling, carved with intricate patterns. Then a desk, waist high. Behind it, I felt for a bell, the kind old hotels used to have. My fingers found it, and I rang it firmly. The sound was swallowed by the silence almost immediately. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. My academic mind tried to rationalize the situation. The staff were busy or on break, or perhaps the hotel was more casual than I'd expected. Small, historic hotels sometimes operated on their own schedule. I would wait. Someone would come. But a smaller, more primitive part of my brain whispered that something was wrong, that the silence wasn't natural, that I should leave, should walk back out into the cold air, should call another taxi and find a different hotel. I heard footsteps then, slow, measured, approaching from somewhere deeper in the building. They had an odd quality, a slight drag to them, as if the walker was injured or exhausted. "Hello," I said, relief flooding through me. "Thank you. I was beginning to think no one was here. I have a reservation. Room 7. The voice was male, aged, with a thickness to it like he was speaking through cloth. "Up the stairs. 2nd floor. 2nd door on the left." I waited for more. For questions about payment, for help with my luggage, for the small courtesies that hotels usually provided. But there was only silence again, and I realized the footsteps had stopped. He was standing very close to me. I could hear his breathing, slow and labored. "Thank you," I said, uncomfortable with his proximity. "Could someone help me with my bag?" "You'll manage." It wasn't a question or an offer. It was a statement of fact, delivered in that same muffled voice. Then the footsteps retreated, that same dragging quality to them, fading back into the depths of the building. I found the stairs by following the wall. 19 steps. I counted them. The banister was smooth wood, worn by countless hands. At the top, I turned left, counted 2 doors, and found the knob. The key. When had I picked up a key? I didn't remember anyone giving me a key, but there it was in my hand. Old-fashioned and heavy, fit the lock perfectly. The room smelled of old fabric and dust. I felt my way inside, found the bed, the nightstand, a chair. Everything was there, arranged exactly as I'd expected. I unpacked by touch and memory, hanging my clothes in what I hoped was a closet, placing my toiletries in what seemed to be a bathroom. I was exhausted. The travel, the confusion, the strangeness of the hotel. It all caught up with me at once. I lay down on the bed, intending to rest for just a moment before finding dinner, and fell into immediate, dreamless sleep. I woke to pain. Not physical pain, though my head throbbed and my eyes burned. This was something else, something deeper. A pain that seemed to originate from behind my eyes, spreading through my skull like cracks in glass. I sat up, gasping, pressing my palms against my closed eyelids. The pressure helped, but only slightly. The pain pulsed in time with my heartbeat, each throb bringing a wave of nausea. And then I saw light. Not metaphorically, not in a dream. I saw light, a faint glow, diffuse and gray, filtering through my closed eyelids. That's impossible, I thought. I'm blind. The doctors had been clear. The damage to my optic nerves was complete, irreversible. I would never see again. But I could see something. The glow persisted, grew stronger, and with it came shapes. Vague at first, but sharpening with each painful pulse behind my eyes. The room around me, rendered in shades of gray and darker gray. The nightstand, the window, I opened my eyes. The world rushed in, not in color, not clearly, but in enough detail to make me cry out. I could see. After 7 years of darkness, I could see again. The room was old, far older than I'd imagined. The wallpaper was peeling, revealing water stains underneath. The furniture looked like antiques, but not well-maintained ones. Everything was worn, broken, neglected. The window showed darkness outside, but I could see the glass was cracked, held together with tape that had yellowed with age. This wasn't the room my assistant had booked. This wasn't even close to the photos on the website, but I could see it. I could see. I stood on shaking legs and walked to the mirror that hung above the dresser. My reflection stared back at me. My face, older than I remembered, thinner, marked by 7 years of darkness. But my eyes were different. They seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, reflecting like an animal's eyes in headlights. What's happening to me? I whispered to my reflection. My reflection didn't answer. But behind it, in the mirror, I saw something else. Someone else. A figure stood in the corner of the room, tall, impossibly thin, with skin that looked like old paper. It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching me with eyes that were too large, too dark, too empty. I spun around. The corner was empty. But when I looked back at the mirror, the figure was still there, still watching. I ran from the room. The hallway was dark, but I could see it now. See the warped floorboards, the stained walls, the doors to other rooms all closed. I stumbled toward the stairs, my new sight making me clumsy. I'd learned to navigate by touch and sound, but vision was overwhelming. Too much information flooding my brain at once. The lobby was worse than I'd imagined. What I'd felt as a grand space was actually a small, decrepit room. The desk I'd found was rotting, the wood soft and dark with moisture. The floor was a patchwork of cracked tiles and missing sections. Everything was decay and neglect, as if the hotel had been abandoned for decades. "Hello," I called out. "I need to leave. I need to check out." The dragging footsteps came again. The man, if it was a man, emerged from a doorway behind the desk. In the gray non-light of my new vision, I could see him clearly. Or rather, I could see that there wasn't much to see. His features were indistinct, blurred, as if he was slightly out of focus. His clothes hung on him strangely, and that dragging sound came from his left leg, which seemed to bend at angles legs shouldn't bend. "You can't leave," he said in that muffled voice. "You've been given a gift. You must stay until you understand it." A gift. What are you talking about? What's wrong with my eyes? Nothing is wrong. Everything is right. You can see now. Truly see. Not the superficial world of light and color that blinds the sighted. You see what's really there. What's always been there. I want to leave. Now. He didn't move. "The door is behind you. You're welcome to try." I turned and ran for the entrance. The door was there, exactly where I'd come in. But when I grabbed the handle and pulled, it wouldn't budge. I pushed instead. Still nothing. The door was immovable. as if it had been sealed shut. "It opens when it wants to," the man said from behind me, "not when you want it to." I spun back to face him, but he was gone. The lobby was empty again. But in my peripheral vision, I saw movement, shapes darting just out of sight. And when I looked up at the landing of the stairs, I saw them clearly figures. Dozens of them, standing perfectly still, watching me with eyes that reflected no light. They weren't human. Not entirely. Their proportions were wrong, their movements. When they did move, too fluid or too jerky, never natural. And they were everywhere, I realized. In every shadow, every corner, pressed against walls or hanging from the ceiling. All watching, all waiting. I ran back to my room, slammed the door, locked it. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst. I pressed my back against the door and closed my eyes, willing the sight to go away, praying for the familiar darkness. But when I opened my eyes again, my room was full of them. They crowded every available space, standing impossibly close together, their bodies overlapping in ways that shouldn't work, all facing me, all watching with those terrible, empty eyes. I screamed. The sound seemed to pass through them without effect. They didn't react, didn't move, just watched. And I realized they'd always been here. All along, while I'd been blind, while I'd been feeling my way around the room, they'd been here. Watching, waiting, close enough to touch, but I'd never known. That's what the man had meant. I'd been given sight, but not the sight the sighted have. I'd been given the ability to see what exists in the spaces between light and dark. The things that live in corners and shadows. The presences that crowd around us, invisible to normal eyes, but always there, always watching. I don't know how long I stood with my back pressed against that door. Hours, maybe. The figures never moved, never blinked, never gave any indication they were anything but statues. But I knew they were aware. I could feel their attention like a weight pressing down on me. Eventually, exhaustion won. I couldn't stay alert forever. I slid down to the floor, my vision blurring with tears and fatigue. I must have dozed off, because when I jerked awake, the room had changed. The figures were gone, but the room itself looked different in ways I couldn't quite articulate. The walls seemed to pulse slightly, as if breathing. The shadows moved independently of any light source, and written on the mirror in something dark and thick were words, "Elshmei." I spent 3 days in that hotel. 3 days that felt like 3 years. I tried the door every hour. It never opened. I tried the window. It wouldn't break. It wouldn't even crack, no matter how hard I hit it. I tried screaming for help, but my voice seemed to stop at the walls, absorbed by the building itself, and all the while I saw them. The figures, sometimes in groups, sometimes alone. Sometimes they were vaguely human-shaped. Sometimes they were something else entirely. All angles and impossible geometries, forms that hurt to perceive. I learned to not look directly at them. Like my old blindness, peripheral vision became my friend. I could almost pretend they weren't there, if I kept my eyes unfocused, if I concentrated on the ordinary objects in the room. But at night, when exhaustion forced me to try to sleep, they would gather around my bed. I would feel them there in the darkness behind my closed eyelids, not seeing them exactly, but knowing they were there with a certainty that was worse than sight. Their attention felt like insects crawling over my skin. On the third night, or what I thought was the third night, time having become fluid and unreliable, the man with the dragging footsteps came to my room. He stood in the doorway. That blurred figure, his head tilted at an angle that suggested curiosity. "Do you understand now?" he asked in that muffled voice. Understand what? My own voice was hoarse from screaming, from crying, from the fear that had become my constant companion. What it means to see, really see. The world isn't what you thought it was when you could see colors and shapes and faces. That's just the surface, the skin. Underneath, reality is crowded, full, teeming with things that exist outside the narrow spectrum human eyes evolved to perceive. Why me? Why did you do this to me? We didn't do anything. You were already marked. The blindness. It was preparation. 7 years in darkness, learning to navigate without sight. You were being trained, whether you knew it or not. Trained to see what comes next. What comes next? He made a sound that might have been a laugh. The others are waking up. All over the world, in places like this, people are being given the gift. People who've lived in darkness, who've learned to perceive without seeing. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. Soon, there will be enough of you to see what's really happening, to understand what's been happening all along, while humanity stumbled through its comfortable, limited perception of reality. I don't want this gift. I want to be blind again. I want to leave. The door will open tomorrow. You'll leave this hotel and return to your life. But you'll never be blind again. Not truly. You'll always see them now. Everywhere you go, everyone you meet, you'll see what stands behind them, what whispers in their shadows, what crowds into their spaces when they're not looking. How do I make it stop? You don't. This is your reality now. This is everyone's reality, but you're one of the few who can perceive it. Use that knowledge however you wish. Warn people if you like. Try to explain what you've seen. But they won't believe you. They never do. The sighted are blind to everything that matters. He turned and dragged himself back into the darkness of the hallway. I heard his footsteps fade, that irregular rhythm disappearing into the depths of the hotel. True to his word, the door opened the next morning. Not the door to my room, that had never been locked, but the front door, the exit to the outside world. I felt it somehow, knew without checking that it would open now, that the hotel was releasing me. I gathered my things quickly, desperately, not looking at the corners where I knew the figures still stood. I ran down the stairs, through the lobby, and burst out into the cold morning air. The street was there, exactly as I'd last seen it in my sighted days 7 years ago. buildings, cars, people walking past with coffee cups and cell phones. Normal, ordinary, real, except for the things that walked beside them, the figures that peered over their shoulders, the shapes that crowded every doorway, every window, every shadow. They were everywhere. A woman passed me on the sidewalk, talking on her phone, oblivious to the three figures that kept pace with her, their empty eyes. Fixed on the back of her head, a man waited at the crosswalk, checking his watch, while something impossibly thin and long coiled around his legs, like a serpent made of smoke and malice. A child held her mother's hand, smiling up at her, not seeing the figure that crouched on the mother's shoulders, whispering into her ear. They were everywhere, and no one could see them. No one but me. I thought about going to the conference, presenting my paper on medieval symbolism, sitting in lectures and taking notes, and pretending everything was normal. But how could I? How could I stand in a room full of people and their attendant horrors and act like nothing had changed? Instead, I walked. I walked for hours through the city, seeing it as I'd never seen it before. The world was crowded, so much more crowded than anyone realized. For every human, there were dozens of the others. Hundreds, maybe, all existing in that space between seen and unseen, acknowledged and ignored. And the worst part, some of them were trying to communicate. I could see their mouths moving, those that had mouths, see their hands reaching out, those that had hands. They were trying to make contact, trying to be perceived, trying to be understood. But the humans walked through them like they were nothing, like they didn't exist. Was this what I'd been missing all those years while blind? Had they been there then, too, crowding around me in the darkness, trying to make contact while I navigated by touch and sound? The thought made me sick. I'm writing this in a coffee shop. The barista who made my latte has 4 figures standing behind her, their hands on her shoulders like they're posing for a family photo. She smiles and asks if I need anything else, completely unaware. I want to warn her. I want to tell her to run, to get away from whatever those things are. But what would I say? Excuse me. Did you know you're being watched by entities that exist outside normal perception? She'd think I was crazy. Maybe I am crazy. Maybe the hotel broke something in my mind, and all of this is hallucination, psychosis, a complete break from reality. But it feels real. It looks real. And the fact that no one else can see them doesn't make them less present. I can't go home. My apartment will be full of them. I know it will. Every room, every corner, every shadow harboring something that watches and waits. How can I sleep knowing they're there? How can I live? The conference ended yesterday. I didn't attend a single session. My assistant has been calling. I can see her name on my phone, along with a dozen missed calls from colleagues and friends. But I can't answer. What would I tell them? How do I explain that I was blind and now I see, but what I see is more terrible than any darkness? The man at the hotel said others are waking up. Others are being given this gift. Part of me hopes he was telling the truth. Part of me hopes I'll find others who can see what I see, who can confirm that I'm not insane, that this is real. But another part of me, the part that remembers what it was like to be blind, to navigate a world of touch and sound and blessed ignorance, that part wishes I'd never regained sight at all. Because in darkness, at least I couldn't see what surrounded me. In darkness, the figures and their empty eyes and their crowding presence were just unknowns. Theories. Possibilities. Now they're certainties. Now they're everywhere I look. And they're looking back. The barista is asking if I'm okay. I must look terrible. I haven't slept properly in days. Haven't eaten much. Can't stop my hands from shaking. Behind her, the four figures lean in closer, as if interested in her question, curious about my answer. I tell her I'm fine, just tired, just adjusting to some new medication. She smiles sympathetically. One of the figures mimics her smile, its mouth stretching too wide, showing too many teeth. I pay for my coffee and leave. The street is crowded with humans and their attendant others. The afternoon sun is setting, casting long shadows that are fuller than they should be. I walk without direction, without purpose, just moving, because staying still means watching, and watching means seeing, and seeing is the one thing I wish I could stop doing. My phone buzzes. A message from my assistant, Duka Chen. Please respond. We're worried about you. Just let us know you're safe. Safe. What does that even mean anymore? How can anyone be safe when we're constantly surrounded, constantly observed, constantly accompanied by things we can't see and wouldn't believe in even if we could? I start to type a response, then stop. What would I say? Instead, I turn off my phone, and I keep walking. Because that's all I can do now. Walk and see, and try not to think about what 7 years of blindness was protecting me from. Try not to wonder what will happen when more people wake up, when more people are given the gift of true sight. Try not to imagine a world where everyone can see what I see, where the veil is lifted and humanity finally understands how crowded and watched and accompanied we've always been. Would we go mad? Would we adapt? Would we finally be able to communicate with the things that have been trying to reach us all along? I don't know. I don't know anything anymore, except that I can see, and seeing has shown me that the world is not at all what I thought it was. The hotel is behind me now, blocks away, but I can still feel its presence, still feel its attention, like it's watching me from a distance, curious about what I'll do with my gift. And ahead of me, the city stretches on, full of people and their shadows light, and what lives in between, the seen and the desperately unseen. I walk into it, my new eyes open, my old blindness gone forever, and I wonder if darkness wasn't the real gift after all. At least in darkness, I could pretend I was alone. Story 3. I inherited my grandmother's house on a Tuesday. The lawyer's office smelled of old paper and lemon furniture polish, and the keys felt unnaturally heavy in my palm as she placed them there. Your grandmother specifically requested you receive the house. She said, her reading glasses catching the fluorescent light. There's a letter as well. The envelope was yellowed, sealed with actual wax, a crimson circle pressed with some symbol I couldn't quite make out. Inside, my grandmother's spidery handwriting covered a single page, "Dearest Margaret, the house is yours now, as it was mine, as it was your great-grandmother's before me. You'll find what you need in the attic. Don't be afraid. A fear closes doors that should remain open. Remember, blood calls to blood. With love eternal, grandmother." I read it 3 times, finding no clarity. My grandmother had always spoken in riddles, had always known things she shouldn't. As a child, I'd loved her stories about our family history, though my mother dismissed them as fabrications. "She's just lonely," my mother would say. Old people make up stories when reality disappoints. But my grandmother had never seemed disappointed. If anything, she'd seemed knowing, satisfied, as if she possessed secrets that amused her. The house stood at the end of a long gravel driveway, surrounded by oak trees that had been ancient when my great-grandfather first settled this land. 3 stories of weathered clapboard, windows like watchful eyes, and a steep roof crowned by a widow's walk that no one had used in living memory. I'd visited often as a child, but hadn't returned since my teenage years. Now, standing before it with 2 suitcases and a cardboard box of essentials, I felt like I was meeting a stranger who somehow knew me intimately. The key turned smoothly in the lock. Too smoothly for a house that had stood empty for 3 months, since my grandmother's death. Inside, everything was exactly as I remembered. The same floral wallpaper, now faded to ghostly impressions. The same dark wood furniture, polished to a deep shine. The same smell of lavender and old books and something else. Something I couldn't quite name. Something like copper and honey mixed together. I spent the first day cleaning and organizing, reacquainting myself with the rooms. The parlor with its horsehair sofa. The kitchen with its ancient cast iron stove. The library lined with books in languages I didn't recognize. By evening, I'd restored some semblance of order to the first floor, but I hadn't yet ventured upstairs. The attic stairs began on the 3rd floor, behind a door I'd never been allowed to open as a child. Not yet, my grandmother would say whenever I asked. When you're ready, the attic will call you. I'd thought it was another of her eccentric sayings. But that night, alone in the house with wind rattling the windows, I heard something. A soft creaking from above. Footsteps, almost, except no one was there. I tried to ignore it. Tried to focus on unpacking, on making tea, on any of the dozen mundane tasks that needed attention. But the sound persisted. And beneath it, I detected something else. A low humming, barely audible, like a distant chorus singing in a language of vowels and breath. At midnight, I gave in. The attic door opened without resistance. The stairs beyond climbed steeply into darkness that my flashlight couldn't quite penetrate. I ascended slowly, each wooden step groaning beneath my weight announcing my presence to whatever waited above. The attic was larger than I'd expected, running the full length of the house. Dormer windows on either end let in pale moonlight that striped the floorboards. Shapes loomed in the shadows. Old furniture, stacked trunks, draped objects I couldn't identify. Dust motes danced in my flashlight beam, swirling in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. And in the center of the room, illuminated by a shaft of moonlight, sat a trunk. Not just any trunk. This one was different, larger than the others, made of dark wood bound with iron straps. Symbols had been carved into its surface. The same symbols that had sealed my grandmother's letter. They seemed to shift in the uncertain light, rearranging themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. I approached slowly. The humming sound grew louder with each step, resonating in my chest like a second heartbeat. When I stood directly before the trunk, I noticed the lock. It was complex, covered in more of those shifting symbols, and it should have required a key. But when I reached out, my fingers barely grazing the cold metal, the lock clicked open. The lid lifted with surprising ease. Inside, wrapped in cloth that might once have been white, but had aged to the color of old bones, lay objects that made my breath catch. A knife, its blade black as obsidian, its handle wrapped in what looked like human hair. A wooden box containing teeth. Human teeth. I was certain, though they were longer and sharper than any I'd seen. A leather, bound book with no title. Its pages covered in handwriting that shifted between languages and scripts. Bottles of liquid in colors that shouldn't exist. Purple black like a bruise, green like infected flesh, red like arterial blood. And at the very bottom, wrapped separately in silk, a mirror. I lifted the mirror carefully. Its frame was silver, tarnished nearly black, decorated with more of those symbols. The glass itself was dark, barely reflective, as if coated with smoke on the reverse side. As I held it, my reflection slowly clarified. But it wasn't quite right. The woman looking back at me had my face, but her eyes were different. Older, knowing, amused. She smiled, and I felt my own lips curve in response, though I'd made no conscious decision to smile. In the mirror, movement. Behind my reflection, shapes gathered. Women, I thought, though their forms were indistinct, wavering like heat shimmer. They surrounded my reflected self, and I understood with sudden, awful clarity that these were my ancestors. Not just my grandmother, but all of them. The women who had lived in this house, who had tended this land, who had kept these secrets, and they were trying to show me something. I watched, transfixed, as my reflection's hand, moving independently of my own, lifted the obsidian knife. She pricked her finger on its tip, letting a single drop of blood fall onto the mirror's surface. The blood didn't run down the glass. Instead, it spread outward like ink in water, creating patterns, images, a story written in crimson. I saw a clearing in the woods, a circle of stones, a fire burning low and blue, women dancing around it, their movements both beautiful and terrible. I saw what they danced for. Not gods, not devils, but something older. Something that lived in the spaces between things, in the gaps where reality grew thin. I saw the pact they made. Power in exchange for service. Long life in exchange for vigilance. Knowledge in exchange for sacrifice. And I saw what they guarded. What they had guarded for generations. The vision ended abruptly. My reflection returned to normal, or almost normal. She still had that knowing look, that slight smile. And when she mouthed words I couldn't hear, I understood them anyway. Your turn. I dropped the mirror. It landed on the soft cloth at the bottom of the trunk, unbroken. My hand trembled as I stared at it, watching my reflections slowly fade back into smoky obscurity. This was insane. Mirrors didn't show visions. Dead ancestors didn't communicate through reflective surfaces. I was exhausted, emotional from my grandmother's death, overwhelmed by the responsibility of the house. That was all. A stress-induced hallucination. But the knife was real. The teeth were real. The book was real. I reached for the book with hands that no longer felt entirely like my own. Its cover was warm to the touch, almost body temperature. When I opened it, the pages released a scent of herbs and smoke, and that copper, honey smell that permeated the house. The first page held a single sentence in English. We write ourselves into the world. The pages that followed contained entries in different hands, different inks, different languages. Some I could read. Most I couldn't. But as I turned the pages, words began to clarify, translating themselves before my eyes. Or perhaps translating themselves in my mind. I couldn't tell the difference anymore. They were instructions. Recipes. Almost. But not for cooking. One entry described how to see through walls. Another explained how to hear thoughts. A third detailed the process of walking through dreams. Each entry was signed with a name and a date. I recognized some of the names from family stories. Others were completely unknown to me. Near the end of the book, I found blank pages, waiting for me to add my own entries, my own discoveries. I slammed the book shut. This was too much. Whatever this was. Family tradition, occult practice, elaborate delusion. I wanted no part of it. I would put everything back in the trunk. Lock the attic. Leave this house. Sell it to whoever would take it. I would return to my normal life, my mundane job, my ordinary existence. I gathered the objects, preparing to return them to the trunk. But as my hands touched each item, something happened. Memories that weren't mine flooded through me. My grandmother, standing in this attic, holding the same knife. My great-grandmother, reading from this book by candlelight. My great-great-grandmother, dancing in a moonlit clearing. And further back, women whose names I'd never heard, whose faces I'd never seen, who had nonetheless shaped me through generations of careful breeding. Specific matches, deliberate choice. They had built toward something. Toward me. Blood calls to blood. My grandmother had written. I understood now. This wasn't inheritance. This was initiation. The house creaked around me. That humming sound returned, louder now, coming from everywhere and nowhere. The symbols on the trunk began to glow softly, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. The mirror at the bottom of the trunk cleared again, showing not my reflection but the attic itself. Except in the reflection, the attic was full. Dozens of women stood there, filling every corner, spanning generations. They looked at me with expressions of encouragement, expectation, hunger, waiting to see what I would choose. I could leave. The door stood open. Nothing physically prevented me from walking down those stairs, out of this house, away from this legacy. But I knew, with certainty that reached into my bones, that leaving wouldn't save me. The knowledge had already taken root. The blood connection had already been made. Whatever my ancestors had been, whatever they had done, it lived in me now. The only question was whether I would accept it or spend my life fighting something woven into my very cells. I picked up the obsidian knife. It fit my hand perfectly, the wrapped handle conforming to my grip, as if it had been made for me. Perhaps it had been. Perhaps each woman in my line had held this knife, had made the same choice I was making now. I didn't know what I was supposed to do with it. The book probably explained, but I couldn't make myself open it again. Not yet. Instead, I simply held the knife and waited, trusting that instinct would guide me. And it did. My feet moved without conscious direction, carrying me to the western dormer window. Through it, I could see the woods that bordered the property. And deep in those woods, barely visible in the moonlight, something glowed. The same soft, pulsing light as the symbols on the trunk. The clearing, the place where my ancestors had danced, the place where the pact had been made. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt calm, resolved, as if I were remembering something rather than experiencing it for the first time. I descended from the attic, leaving the trunk open, the objects exposed to the moonlight. Through the house I walked, out the back door, across the lawn where frost had begun to form in crystalline patterns. The woods welcomed me, branches pulling back as I passed, roots smoothing underfoot to ease my way. The clearing was exactly as the mirror had shown me. A circle of stones, each one carved with symbols that glowed in the darkness. In the center, a fire pit, though no fire burned there now. The ground was bare earth, packed hard by countless feet over countless years. I stood in the center of the circle and waited. They came slowly, not walking exactly, materializing. My grandmother appeared first, looking younger than I'd ever seen her, her hair still dark, her face unlined. Then the others, one by one. A procession of women stretching back through centuries, each one bearing some resemblance to me, some echo of my features in theirs. They formed a circle around me, their expressions serene. My grandmother stepped forward. "You found it," she said. Her voice sounded real, solid, not like a ghost at all. I wondered if you would. Some don't, you know. Some let fear close the door. "What is this?" I asked. "What are we?" "Guardians," she replied. "Keepers of thin places. Watchers of the spaces between. When reality grows fragile, When the walls between worlds wear thin, we maintain the balance. We have done so for longer than written history. And the price? She smiled sadly. There's always a price. We live long, unnaturally long. We gain knowledge forbidden to others. We see what others cannot see. But we cannot leave. The land holds us. The duty binds us. And when our time ends, we don't rest. We remain watching, guiding, waiting for the next in our line. I looked around the circle at all those watching faces. You're all still here. In a manner of speaking, we're echoes, impressions, the essential parts of ourselves, preserved by the pact. The part that knew duty, that understood responsibility, that accepted the burden. We stay to teach, to support, to ensure the work continues. What if I refuse? Then the line ends. The watching stops. And what we've kept at bay for so long will finally break through. What things? My grandmother's expression grew grave. Do you really want to know? Some knowledge, once gained, cannot be forgotten. Some sights once seen cannot be unseen. I thought about the trunk, about the objects inside it. Tools, not weapons, but tools. Implements for a specific purpose. And I thought about my life outside this place. My job, my friends, my plans. All of it suddenly felt thin, insubstantial. Like a story I'd been telling myself to avoid facing something true. "Show me," I said. The women in the circle joined hands. The stones began to pulse more brightly. And reality peeled back like old wallpaper. I saw what lived in the spaces between. Entities without form, consciousness without bodies, hungers that could never be satisfied. They pressed against the boundaries of the world, seeking entrance, seeking substance, seeking to experience existence in ways their nature didn't permit. And I saw what happened when the boundaries failed. Cities where madness bloomed overnight. Forests where trees grew teeth. Lakes that reflected skies from other worlds. People who woke up speaking in languages that had never existed. Their minds filled with memories of lives they'd never lived. My ancestors stood guard against this. They performed rituals that reinforced the boundaries. They spoke words that strengthened the walls between worlds. They bled into the earth to keep it anchored to reality. The vision faded. I stood again in the clearing, surrounded by my ghostly family, my hands trembling around the obsidian knife. "How?" I asked. "How do I do this?" "The book will teach you," my grandmother said, "and we will guide you. But first, you must accept. You must make the choice freely, or the pact has no power." I looked down at the knife in my hand, at the clearing around me, at the stones that had stood here longer than my family had owned this land, because the land didn't belong to us. We belonged to it. "I accept," I whispered. The words felt final, binding. The moment I spoke them, something shifted. The air grew heavier. The light from the stones intensified. And from deep in the earth beneath my feet, I felt a pulse. An answering. An acknowledgement. My grandmother smiled. "Then let us begin." She taught me the first ritual that night. How to walk the boundaries of the property, marking the corners with blood and breath and intention. How to speak the words that needed no translation because they bypassed language entirely, reaching directly into the fabric of reality to tug at specific threads. How to feel the thin places, the spots where the boundaries had worn tissue, thin and needed reinforcement. By dawn, I was exhausted. My feet ached. My voice was hoarse. The knife felt like part of my hand, its weight so familiar. I could no longer imagine being without it. The women faded as sunlight broke through the trees. My grandmother was the last to go, lingering for a moment with her hand on my shoulder. I felt the pressure, though she was no longer solid. "You'll do well," she said. "Better than I did, I think. You have your mother's skepticism. It will serve you when belief might blind you." Then she was gone, and I stood alone in the clearing as ordinary morning birdsong filled the air. I returned to the house in a daze. Everything looked different now. The walls seemed more substantial, as if they'd solidified overnight. The symbols carved into doorframes and windowsills, which I'd always assumed were merely decorative, now revealed themselves as wards, protections, markers of safe passage. The house wasn't just a building. It was a fortress, a lighthouse, a watchtower standing guard at a critical junction between realities. And I was its keeper. I spent the following days studying the book. Each entry revealed new layers of understanding. My great-great-grandmother had been particularly detailed in her observations, noting the cycles of weakness in the boundaries. Every new moon, every solstice, every time certain stars aligned in particular ways. My grandmother's entries were more philosophical, exploring the nature of the entities that pressed against our world, theorizing about their origins and motivations. Near the end, I found an entry in handwriting I didn't recognize. The date was 1847. The entry was short. Today I performed the ritual for the first time alone. Mother passed 3 days ago. I felt her presence in the clearing, guiding my hands, speaking the words with me, though her voice was silent. I understand now why we do not truly die. The work is too important, the knowledge too precious. We become part of the defense itself, woven into the boundaries we protect. I am not afraid. I read it 3 times, my throat tight. This unknown ancestor had been my age when she'd taken up the duty. Had she felt as overwhelmed as I did? Had she doubted? But she had persevered, and so had all the others. Generation after generation, maintaining the watch, keeping the boundaries strong. Now it was my turn. The changes began subtly. At first, I thought I was imagining them. Colors seemed more vivid. Sounds carried meanings beyond their surface level. I could hear intent in birdsong, emotion in wind chimes. My sense of smell sharpened, until I could detect the presence of thin places by scent alone. They smelled like ozone and copper, and something sweet, sick, like fruit just beginning to rot. My dreams changed too. I dreamed of the clearing, of the rituals, of my ancestors teaching me things I didn't know I needed to learn. Sometimes I woke with new knowledge in my head, fully formed instructions for rituals I'd never read about in the book. and I began to see them. Not just my ancestors, but the others. The things that pressed against the boundaries. They appeared at dusk, when the light grew uncertain. Shapes that flickered at the corners of my vision. Shadows that moved independently of any object that might cast them. Occasionally, on nights when the boundaries grew particularly thin, I saw them more clearly. Beings of geometry and color that hurt to perceive, their forms impossible yet undeniable. They weren't evil, I realized after several weeks of observation. They weren't good either. They simply were. Creatures whose existence followed rules different from ours, whose very nature was incompatible with our reality. Allowing them through wouldn't be malicious on their part. They wouldn't mean to destroy. But their presence would warp and twist everything they touched, remaking it according to their own nature's imperatives. I understood why the watch was necessary. My life settled into new rhythms. By day, I tended the house and grounds, maintaining the physical structures that supported the metaphysical ones. By night, I walked the boundaries, reinforced the wards, spoke the words that needed speaking. Every new moon, I performed the full ritual in the clearing, and my ancestors gathered to witness and support. I stopped answering my phone. Let my job go without explanation. Friends who tried to visit found the house, somehow always just out of reach. GPS coordinates that led to empty fields, driveways that seemed to loop back on themselves. The house was protecting me, I realized, or protecting itself. The two had become indistinguishable. Months passed, then a year. Time felt different now, less linear. Days blended into each other, marked only by the cycles of ritual and maintenance. I aged slowly, another gift or curse of the pact. My grandmother had been 93 when she died, but had looked 60. I was 30, and already noticed my face changing less with each passing season. The book filled slowly with my own entries, observations about the nature of the boundaries, discoveries about which herbs strengthened wards, which phases of the moon made the thin places more vulnerable. I wrote about the entities I saw, trying to catalog them, to understand their patterns, and I wrote about the loneliness, the isolation that came with this duty. No one from my old life could understand. No one could be told. The knowledge itself was dangerous. Believing in the thin places made them more real, more accessible. Ignorance was humanity's best protection. Sometimes I resented my grandmother for choosing me. Sometimes I wished I'd never opened that trunk, never found the clearing, never accepted the burden. But those feelings never lasted long, because beneath the resentment, beneath the loneliness, I felt something else. Purpose, meaning, the deep satisfaction of work that mattered. I was 20, 2 months into my watch, when something changed. It started with the mirror. I'd kept it on a shelf in the attic, wrapped in its silk, unwilling to look into it again. But one night, I heard it calling, not with sound, but with presence. An insistent pulling that drew me up the stairs, through the door, to the trunk where I'd first found it. The silk had unwrapped itself. The mirror lay exposed, its dark surface gleaming in the moonlight that streamed through the dormer window. I picked it up carefully. My reflection appeared immediately, clearer than before. But I wasn't alone. Behind me stood a woman I didn't recognize. Younger than my grandmother, but clearly from an earlier generation. Her clothes dated to perhaps the 1920s, and her expression was urgent. She pointed past me, toward the eastern window. I turned to look, and through the glass I saw lights in the woods. Not the soft glow of the clearing, but harsh, white lights. Flashlights. Several of them moving through the trees toward the property. My heart raced. In all my time here, no one had approached the house. The wards had kept everyone away, but these lights kept coming unaffected. I looked back at the mirror. The woman's mouth moved, forming words I could somehow hear. They've found a way through. You must stop them before they reach the clearing. Who are they? People who want what we guard, who think they can control it, who believe power is meant to be taken rather than tended. Her expression grew fierce. They've been searching for us for generations. They've learned to see past the wards. You must not let them succeed. The mirror went dark. I stood alone in the attic, my ancestors' tools surrounding me, while intruders approached through the woods. I grabbed the obsidian knife and ran. The clearing appeared different as I approached. The stones pulsed with agitation, their light flickering irregularly. The thin place here, the junction my family had guarded for so long, was reacting to the intruder's presence, weakening, beginning to tear. I reached the circle just as the first figure emerged from the trees. A man, middle-aged, carrying equipment I didn't recognize. Behind him came 3 others, 2 women and another man, all dressed in dark clothing, all moving with purpose. They stopped when they saw me standing in the center of the stone circle, knife in hand. You must be the new guardian, the first man said. His voice was pleasant, educated, reasonable. The voice of someone used to getting what they wanted through persuasion rather than force. Your grandmother was quite dedicated. We tried for years to speak with her, but she refused all contact. Leave? I said. You don't belong here. That's where you're wrong. He stepped closer to the circle's edge, but didn't cross it. This place belongs to everyone. The knowledge you hoard should be shared. The power you keep locked away could transform the world. It would destroy the world. Only because you're afraid of change. One of the women spoke now, her tone condescending. You've been taught to fear what you guard, but we've studied it. We understand it. We could control it, use it, improve humanity with it. I felt the boundaries shudder. These people's very presence, their intentions, their belief that they could master what existed beyond. It was all weakening the walls my ancestors had died to maintain. You understand nothing, I said, and I meant it. They had studied, perhaps, had learned tricks and techniques. But they hadn't lived with it, hadn't felt the weight of the entities, pressing against reality, hadn't sensed their hunger and incomprehension. "Then teach us," the first man said. "Join us." Together we could. I didn't let him finish. I raised the knife and spoke words that had no English equivalent. The stones flared bright. The boundary between the circle and the woods solidified, becoming impassable. The intruders stumbled backward, shielding their eyes. When the light faded, they stood outside an invisible wall, fury replacing their reasonable expressions. "You can't keep us out forever," one of them snarled. "We know where you are now. We'll come back. We'll find a way." They might. That was the terrifying truth. If they'd managed to bypass the property wards once, they could do it again. They could bring others. They could try to overpower me, take the house, claim the clearing for themselves. I needed help. But there was only one kind of help available to me now. I turned to face the center of the clearing and spoke different words. Words of invitation. Words of summoning. My ancestors appeared. Not just my grandmother this time, but all of them. Thousands of women, spanning centuries, filling the clearing with their presence. They turned their attention to the intruders, and I saw fear finally enter those presumptuous faces. "What are they?" One of the women whispered. "Guardians," I replied. "All of them. All of us. You wanted knowledge. Here it is, we don't end. The duty doesn't end, and you cannot take what we protect." The ghostly women moved forward as one. They didn't touch the intruders. They didn't need to. Their mere presence was enough. The weight of generations of dedicated service, of sacrifice, of unwavering commitment to the watch. It pressed against the intruders like a physical force, pushing them back, away from the clearing, away from the property. I watched them flee, their flashlights bouncing wildly as they ran. When they were gone, when even the sound of their panicked flight had faded, my ancestors turned back to me. My grandmother stepped forward from the crowd. "They will come back," she said quietly. "Others like them always do. Each generation faces this challenge. People who think they can master what should only be tended. What do I do? What we've always done. Watch, ward, protect. And when necessary," she gestured to the knife in my hand, "defend." The other women nodded, their faces grave but resolute. Then, one by one, they faded until only my grandmother remained. "You're stronger than you know," she said. "Stronger than I was at your age. You'll find your own ways of keeping the watch. Trust yourself. Trust the blood. Trust what you've learned." Then she too was gone, and I stood alone in the clearing as dawn began to break. I returned to the house, my mind churning. The intruders had changed everything. My quiet watch had become something more dangerous. I would need to strengthen the wards, learn new protections, perhaps even reach out to others. Were there other families like mine? Other guardians at other thin places? The book had hinted at such things, but never stated it explicitly. In the attic, I opened the trunk again. The objects inside seemed to pulse with greater intensity now, as if responding to the night's events. I reached for the book, intending to search for protection rituals, when I noticed something new. A page had appeared. Fresh ink, still wet, in handwriting I recognized as my own. Though I hadn't written it, the words formed themselves as I watched, flowing across the paper like water finding its course. The watch changes but never ends. The duty adapts but never lessens. Tonight, I learned that protection sometimes requires confrontation, that peace must occasionally be defended with force. My ancestors stand with me. The blood connection sustains me. And the work continues, as it has for generations, as it will for generations to come. I am not alone. I have never been alone. I read the words 3 times, then closed the book gently. The house settled around me with soft creaks and sighs. Through the windows, I could see the sun rising over the woods, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Ordinary morning, ordinary light. But I knew now that ordinariness was an illusion, a thin veneer stretched over realities most people would never see. And I was one of the few who kept that veneer intact, who maintained the boundaries, who stood guard at the threshold. The work would continue. The intruders might return. Other challenges would certainly arise. But I had the tools. I had the knowledge. I had the support of all who had come before me. And I had made my choice. I descended from the attic, leaving the trunk open, the objects exposed to the morning light. They were part of my life now, as natural as breathing, as necessary as heartbeat. In the kitchen, I made coffee and sat at the old wooden table where my grandmother had sat, where her grandmother had sat before her. Through the window, I could see the woods, peaceful in the morning light. No sign of the intruders. No hint of the entities that pressed against the boundaries. But I knew they were there, would always be there, waiting for the watch to falter, for the guardian to fail, for the boundaries to finally, catastrophically break. That wouldn't happen on my watch. I would stand guard, as my ancestors had. I would maintain the rituals, strengthen the wards, defend the threshold. And when my time came to join the ghostly women in the clearing, I would do so knowing I had fulfilled my duty. The house creaked approvingly around me. Or perhaps that was just the wood settling, expanding in the morning warmth. I'd learned not to question such things too closely. Some mysteries were meant to remain mysterious. I sipped my coffee and opened the book again. So much still to learn. So many pages yet to fill with my own observations and discoveries. The work of a lifetime, or several lifetimes, given how slowly I seemed to be aging. Outside, a bird sang. The wind moved through the trees. The world continued its ordinary rotation, unaware of the thin places, the entities, the guardians who kept watch in the darkness. That was fine. Let the world remain unaware. Ignorance was safety. Knowledge was burden. And I had chosen to bear that burden. The attic door stood open above me. The trunk waited. The mirror reflected truths I was still learning to see. And deep in the woods, the clearing pulsed with patient, eternal light. My inheritance. My responsibility. My purpose. I turned the page and began to read. Story 4. The brochure promised 4 days of untouched paradise. What it failed to mention was what paradise costs. My name is Sarah Mitchell. And I'm writing this account from a place that shouldn't exist, in a time that feels like it isn't quite moving forward. I'm unsure if recording this will make any difference to anyone. But the act of writing has become necessary. A way to maintain some coherence in a situation that defies coherent explanation. We arrived on Thursday, 23 of us, brought by ferry to an island that maps showed, but that seemed to occupy a strange space outside normal geography. Our travel guide, a young man named Marcus with 2 bright teeth and eyes that never quite focused on any of us directly, kept assuring us that our 4-day luxury experience would be transformative. I remember thinking the phrasing was odd, relaxing, rejuvenating. Transformative was a different category altogether. The resort itself was built in a U shape around a central lagoon. Open-air wooden structures with flowing white curtains, infinity pools that seemed to blend seamlessly with the ocean behind them. Restaurants serving fresh fish we'd supposedly seen caught that morning. The luxury was genuine, and the isolation was absolute. We'd come to a place where cellular service was non-existent, and the Wi-Fi password changed every day in such a way that only Marcus seemed able to reset it. The first sign something was wrong came on Friday morning. One of the guests, a woman named Jennifer from Toronto, appeared at breakfast looking disoriented. When I asked her how she'd slept, she stared at me with an expression of profound confusion and said, "I didn't sleep. I was somewhere else all night. I don't know where, but I was being shown things. Important things." Before I could respond, Marcus appeared at her shoulder. He didn't touch her, but she immediately stopped talking and went back to her room. I didn't see her for the rest of the day. That evening, as I sat on the terrace watching the sunset, I noticed something off about the ocean's color. It was too still, too uniform. The water looked almost painted, like a massive canvas of liquid cerulean that stretched to the horizon without movement or depth. When I looked away and looked back, the illusion would break for a moment. I'd see actual waves, real texture and motion. Then my vision would smooth, and it would be flat again. By Saturday, 15 of the 23 guests were behaving strangely. They would gather in clusters and speak in low voices about experiences they claimed to have had. One man, Derek, kept insisting that his balcony connected to a much larger space, a dimension that unfolded behind the room. "I can see it," he kept saying, pointing at his sliding glass door. "It's right there. The room extends back for miles." To me, the view beyond his door was identical to mine. Our rooms had virtually the same layout. But he was absolutely convinced of what he was seeing. A couple named Alice and Richard began completing each other's sentences, but not in a cute, connected couple way. Their speech patterns had become perfectly synchronized, their word choices identical. Their thoughts apparently intertwined in a way that seemed concerning rather than endearing. Marcus moved through the resort with increasing frequency. I noticed he was no longer quite answering our questions directly. When we asked him about the strange behavior of other guests, he'd smile and say, "Everyone experiences the island differently. That's the gift. Everyone gets what they need." I asked to use the satellite phone to call the mainland. It was kept locked in his office. He said there was no emergency, so there was no need. His tone suggested the word emergency meant something different than it should mean. On Sunday morning, I realized there were only 17 of us left at breakfast. "Where are the others?" I asked Marcus directly. "Different experiences require different accommodations," he replied. "Some guests have moved to the north sector of the island for their final day. They're having specialized experiences that suit their particular paths of transformation. I want to see them," I said. "I want to make sure they're okay." Marcus's face did something odd. It shifted just slightly, and for a moment I perceived his features out of their normal configuration. His eyes moved too far apart. His mouth stretched wider than anatomically reasonable. Then everything settled back into place, and he was simply smiling at me with that, too, bright expression. "The paths beyond this resort area are for those who are ready," he said. "You haven't expressed readiness yet." That afternoon, the weather began to behave inconsistently. It would be sunny, then instantly overcast, without the transition that clouds normally make. The rain would fall upward sometimes. I'm almost certain it did, though I can't quite trust my own observations anymore. When I mentioned this to another guest, a woman named Preya, she said, "The island is testing the boundaries to see how much reality we're still holding on to. Let it go. It's easier when you let it go." I noticed she had a mark on her skin, a symbol, geometric and intricate, that seemed to be slowly shifting across her arm. When I asked her about it, she said, "It's showing me the way. Soon I'll be ready for the North Sector too." At some point during the endless afternoon, and I'm no longer certain this was actually Sunday, or if time is even maintaining coherence, I made a decision. I needed to leave. I walked down to the beach to see if the ferry would return. There was no beach. Where the sand should have been, there was simply the ocean lapping up to the resort buildings, as though the coast had never existed or had been erased overnight. I ran back inside and found Marcus in the lobby. "I want to leave," I said. "You will," he replied, "soon. First, you need to complete your transformation. Everyone must complete it." "Transformation into what?" I demanded. He gestured around the resort. The other guests visible in the spaces around us had begun to change. Their movements were too smooth, too fluid. When they spoke in unified tones, and I realized their conversations weren't separate. They were all saying the same things in slightly different voices, like a chorus with delayed echoes. Their skin had taken on a luminescent quality, and I could see, or thought I could see, something moving beneath the surface. Something like symbols or words written in light across their flesh. Into residence, Marcus said simply. The island collects people who are lost, who don't quite fit anywhere else. You were all lost when you arrived. The island welcomes lost people. It transforms them, gives them purpose, gives them community, gives them eternity. I tried to leave the resort. The corridors kept returning me to where I started. The exits led back to the lobby. The staircases spiraled without ascending. The building had become impossible, its geometry breaking every rule of three-dimensional space. And with each iteration, I could feel something shifting inside me. My thoughts were becoming less singular, more layered. I was beginning to perceive the world in the way the transformed guests perceived it. I could see the North Sector now, even though I was still physically in the main resort. It existed as an overlay, transparent and vast, stretching across the island like an invisible city. Millions, or it felt like millions, of translucent figures moved through this space, their forms constantly changing, cycling through expressions of human and non-human geometries, and they all seemed to be smiling. Marcus appeared beside me, though I hadn't seen him walk there. "There's still time for you," he said. "You can remain in the resort complex. Not everyone has to go to the North Sector. Some guests choose the slower transformation. They prefer to maintain the illusion of separation a bit longer. It's a valid choice. The island is generous with its options." "What do you want from us?" I asked. "Nothing," he said. "The island wants everything, but that's automatic. It simply is. Your resistance, your fear, your transformation, it all serves. You could fight, or you could accept. Either way, the outcome is the same. Only the experience differs. I don't know how many days have passed. The cycle of light and dark has become unreliable. Sometimes the sun rises and sets multiple times in succession. Sometimes it simply hangs at the horizon, neither rising nor falling. The other guests have all moved into the North Sector now. I'm alone in the resort, or the illusion of alone. Marcus visits sometimes, though I'm not sure he's actually leaving, or if he's simply changing his position within my perception. I can feel the marks forming on my skin, the symbols that will eventually show me the way. I'm beginning to remember things I've never experienced. Events from the lives of the transformed guests. Moments they've lived in this island's non-time. It's like downloading memories, like absorbing thoughts that aren't mine. Sometimes I wonder if the ferry has simply been waiting at the dock the entire time, and I've been too transformed to perceive it. Sometimes I wonder if there ever was a ferry, if there ever was a mainland, if I'm not simply exploring the expanding geometry of a space that was always infinite. The strangest part, and perhaps this is the final sign that the transformation is nearly complete, is that I'm not afraid anymore. The island isn't malevolent. It's not trying to hurt us. It's trying to include us. To show us that the boundaries we maintained between ourselves and reality were always artificial. tomorrow, or the next cycle, or whenever that time arrives. I think I'll walk toward the North Sector. I think I'll let the marks finish their journey across my skin. I think I'll stop resisting and join the chorus. But before I do, I'm writing this as a record, as a warning, as a prayer. If you're reading this and it frightens you, good. Stay far away from islands that promise transformation. Mistrust places that exist on no reliable map. Question the guides who smile like their faces are borrowed. And if you find yourself on an island where the geometry doesn't quite make sense, where the other guests are changing too quickly, where the exits lead only back to where you started, remember that there's still a choice available to you. You can try to escape, or you can try to resist, or you can try to accept. Only the island knows which choice is truly possible. I'm beginning to think they might all be the same choice, experienced from different angles. And I think I'm finally ready to find out. Story 5. I've always found peace in silence. The kind that wraps around you like a blanket, muffling the chaos of the world. That's why I took the night watchman position at Rosemont Cemetery. The pay was modest, but the solitude was priceless. My shift began at midnight. The iron gates would clang shut behind me, and I'd walk the wending paths between weathered headstones, my flashlight cutting through the darkness like a surgical blade. For 3 months, nothing unusual happened. Just me, the stars, and the sleeping dead. But that changed on a Thursday in late October. The air that night felt different, heavier somehow, pressing against my skin with an unfamiliar weight. A fog had rolled in around 11, thick and low, pooling between the graves like spilled milk. By the time I locked the gates at midnight, I could barely see 5 feet ahead. I began my rounds as usual, following the main path that circled the oldest section of the cemetery. My footsteps echoed strangely in the mist, each sound seeming to come from multiple directions at once. I'd learned to ignore such tricks of acoustics. Old cemeteries play with sound in peculiar ways. Then I heard something else, a soft scraping like nails on wood. I stopped walking. The sound continued for a moment, then ceased. Probably an animal, I told myself. Raccoons were common here, and they made all sorts of noises when digging through the trash bins near the maintenance shed. I moved forward again. The scraping resumed, closer now, and beneath it I detected something else, a wet, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across damp earth. My flashlight beam swept left and right, illuminating nothing but fog and stone. The monuments loomed like silent witnesses, their carved angels and crosses seeming to lean toward me with expressions I'd never noticed before. Concerned. Warning. Hello. My voice sounded foolish even to my own ears. Who speaks to an empty graveyard? The scraping stopped. I stood there for what felt like several minutes, my heart performing an uncomfortable rhythm against my ribs. The fog swirled around my ankles, and I noticed it was oddly warm. October nights in New England should be cold. But this mist felt almost body, temperature, as if it had risen from something living rather than from the cooling earth. I decided to check the older section more thoroughly. Part of my job was ensuring no vandals had disturbed the graves. As I walked deeper into the cemetery, the headstones grew older, their inscriptions worn nearly smooth by time and weather. Some dated back to the 1700s, their occupants so long dead that no living person remembered their names. That's when I saw the first one. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. A shadow cast strangely by my flashlight. But as I approached, the shape solidified. A hand bone, white and skeletal, protruded from the earth beside a tilted headstone. The fingers were curled slightly, as if grasping at something invisible in the air. My breath caught. Vandals, I thought. Someone's sick idea of a Halloween prank. I'd heard of people placing fake skeletons in cemeteries this time of year. But as I moved closer, my flashlight revealed details that made my stomach clench. The bones were yellowed with age, dirt still clinging to them. This wasn't plastic. This wasn't fake. I should have called the police. That's what protocol demanded. But something held me frozen in place, staring at that reaching hand. And then, I swear this is true, though I've questioned my sanity every day since, the fingers moved. Just a twitch at first. A small flexing, as if testing their range of motion. Then the hand slowly opened, palm up, like a beggar asking for alms. I stumbled backward, my flashlight beam shaking wildly. The hand continued its deliberate movement, fingers spreading, then curling again. From beneath the earth came that scraping sound, louder now, accompanied by the crack of shifting soil. I ran, not away from the cemetery. I couldn't reach the gates quickly enough through the maze of graves, but toward the maintenance shed where I kept my radio. My feet pounded the path, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The fog seemed to clutch at me, thickening with each step. Behind me, I heard more sounds, multiple sources, the scraping, dragging, snapping of twigs and disturbed earth, and something else, a soft rustling like whispered conversations too quiet to understand. I burst into the shed and slammed the door, fumbling for the lock with trembling fingers. My radio sat on the workbench where I'd left it. I grabbed it and pressed the call button. Static. Pure white static. Hello. This is Rosemont Cemetery. I need police assistance. Please respond. Only static answered. I tried again, and again nothing. The radio had worked perfectly during my last check in at midnight. Now it produced only that empty, hissing sound. Through the shed's grimy window, I could see shapes moving in the fog. At least a dozen of them, maybe more. They walked with an odd, shuffling gait, their movements jerky and uncertain, like puppets manipulated by an amateur. Some were more skeletal than others, those from the older graves, I presumed. Others retained dried remnants of flesh, their forms more recognizable as once human. They weren't walking aimlessly. They were searching. I watched as one figure approached a grave, knelt down, and began to dig with bare bone hands. Another wandered between headstones, pausing at each one, its skull tilting as if reading the inscriptions. A third simply stood still, its empty eye sockets pointed toward the sky, jaw hanging open in a silent scream or plea. What were they looking for? The question echoed in my mind as I pressed myself against the back wall of the shed, trying to become invisible. Through the window, I saw one of the figures turn in my direction. It stood perhaps 50 feet away, shrouded in fog, its form barely visible. But I could feel its attention on me, fixed and unwavering. It didn't approach. It simply stood there watching, or sensing. I wasn't sure these things could see in any conventional sense. Minutes passed, or hours. Time had become elastic, stretching and contracting in ways that made my watch meaningless. The figures continued their searching, their movements growing more frantic. They dug into earth. They traced finger bones along stone. They gathered in small clusters, their skulls tilted toward each other, as if communicating silently. I began to notice patterns. Each figure seemed tethered to a particular area. They would wander within a certain radius, but never beyond it. And they returned, again and again, to the same graves. Not their own, I realized with growing horror. They were searching other people's graves, looking for something, or someone. The shed's walls felt too thin, too flimsy. A simple wooden structure couldn't possibly protect me from whatever was happening outside. But I had nowhere else to go. The cemetery stretched across 10 acres, and the gates were locked. Locked by me when I'd started my shift. My keys hung from my belt, but reaching the gates meant crossing hundreds of yards of open ground, surrounded by those searching figures. My phone. I pulled it from my pocket with shaking hands. No signal. Of course, there was no signal. The cemetery sat in a valley, and cell reception had always been spotty. But I'd never needed it before. Now, the no service. Message felt like a death sentence. I tried anyway, dialing 9011. The call failed. I tried again. Failed. On the third attempt, I heard something. Not a connection, but a voice. Distant and distorted, barely audible through layers of static. Lost. Searching. Please. I nearly dropped the phone. That hadn't come from an operator. The voice was wrong. Too hollow, too echoey, as if spoken from the bottom of a deep well. Hello. I whispered into the phone. Who is this? So long. Can't find. Where are you? The voice faded into static. I stared at the phone screen, my reflection ghostly in its glow. Behind me, through the window, the figures continued their search. Understanding came slowly, like dawn breaking over a landscape I didn't want to see. These weren't monsters. They weren't mindless corpses risen to terrorize the living. They were searching for something precious, something lost, something they needed, their souls. The thought arrived fully formed, and I knew it was true with the same certainty. I knew my own name. Somehow. These people had been buried without their souls, or their souls had been separated from them, scattered or stolen, or simply lost in the transition between life and death. And now, in this fog, thick October night, they had one chance to search. one night to wander and seek, and hope to be whole again. I don't know how I knew this. The knowledge simply existed inside me, as if it had been waiting there all along. The figure nearest the shed moved closer. Through the window, I could see it more clearly now. It wore the remnants of a suit, though the fabric had rotted to mere suggestions of sleeves and collar. Its skull was mostly intact, jaw still attached, a few wisps of hair clinging to the dome. As I watched, it raised one skeletal hand and placed it flat against the glass. I should have been terrified, and I was. But I was also transfixed. The hand remained pressed to the window. After a moment, the figure's other hand rose, fingers tracing something on the glass. Letters. It was drawing letters. H-E-L-P. My throat tightened. I don't know how, I whispered. The figure drew more letters. F-I-N-D. Find what? But the figure had already turned away, resuming its wandering search. I pressed my own hand to the glass where it had been, feeling the cold surface, wondering what separation existed between us. Not just the physical barrier of window glass, but something deeper, the living and the dead, the complete and the fragmented. I made a decision that probably saved my life, or possibly damned me. I'm still not sure which. I opened the shed door. The fog embraced me immediately, warm and clinging. The figures nearby paused their searching, their empty gazes turning in my direction. I stood very still, my flashlight held loosely at my side, waiting to see what they would do. They did nothing. After a moment, they returned to their search. I walked among them, past the one who had drawn on my window, past a figure kneeling beside a grave, its bone fingers sifting through dirt as if panning for gold, past a cluster of 3 who stood together, their skulls tilted toward a single headstone, as if reading something I couldn't see. None of them threatened me. None even seemed particularly interested in me. I was alive, whole, my soul firmly tethered to my body. I had nothing they needed. I found myself walking toward the cemetery's oldest section, drawn by an instinct I didn't question. The fog was thicker here, the headstones more weathered. Some had toppled completely, their inscriptions lost to time. This was where the truly forgotten rested, people whose families had died out, whose names existed nowhere but on these crumbling stones. In the center of this section stood a mausoleum, its marble facade stained with age and moss. I'd never entered it before. The door had always been sealed. But tonight, the door stood ajar. Light spilled from the opening. Not the harsh white of fluorescent bulbs, or the warm yellow of candles. This light was different, soft and silvery, like moonlight reflecting off water. It pulsed gently, breathing. I pushed the door wider and stepped inside. The mausoleum's interior was smaller than I expected. Just a single chamber with stone shelves along the walls where coffins would have rested. But the shelves were empty. And in the center of the floor, where there should have been stone, there was instead that light, pouring upward like a fountain, creating a column that reached toward the ceiling before dissipating into mist. Beautiful. The word felt inadequate. This light was beautiful the way music is beautiful, the way love is beautiful. It made me want to weep, though I couldn't have explained why. And in the light, I saw them. Dozens of translucent forms, swirling and dancing within the silvery column. Souls, each one unique, some bright and bold, others faint and flickering. They moved in patterns that suggested both joy and sorrow, reunion and longing. I understood then. The bodies were searching for these, their other halves, the essential pieces that made them complete, but something prevented them from reuniting. A barrier existed, physical or metaphysical. I couldn't tell. That kept the souls trapped here, while the bodies wandered outside. I reached toward the light, my fingers trembling. Would I feel anything? Could I even touch something so ephemeral? My hand broke the surface of the light column, and sensation flooded through me. Not physical touch, but something deeper. Emotions that weren't mine, grief, longing, hope, desperation. Memories flickered past a woman's laugh, a child's first steps, the taste of apple pie, the smell of rain, the feeling of grass beneath bare feet. Lives condensed into fragments, waiting to be reclaimed by their rightful owners. I pulled back, gasping. Too much. Too intense. My own identity had nearly dissolved in that flood of others' experiences. But now I knew what needed to happen. These souls needed to leave the mausoleum, needed to reach the searching bodies outside, and somehow I was the key. My living presence, my intact connection between body and soul. I was the bridge. I don't remember making a conscious decision. My body simply moved, stepping fully into the light column. The sensation intensified tenfold. I became a conduit, a doorway, a passage. The souls rushed through me like water through a broken dam, each one carrying fragments of lives I'd never lived, loves I'd never felt, losses I'd never suffered. It should have destroyed me. Perhaps it did. In some way I don't yet understand. When I opened my eyes, had I closed them, I stood outside the mausoleum. The light had vanished. The door stood sealed once more, as if it had never opened. And around me, the cemetery had grown still. The bodies remained, but they had changed. They stood straighter now, their movements less jerky. And though they were still dead, still skeletal or partially decayed, there was something present in them that hadn't been before. An essence. A wholeness. One by one, they turned toward their graves and walked back to them. Some lay down on the earth, above their resting places. Others simply stood for a moment, before collapsing gently, their bones settling back into the positions they'd held for decades or centuries. A few turned toward me first, and though they had no eyes, I felt their gratitude like a physical weight. Within minutes, the cemetery looked as it always had. Peaceful, silent, empty of movement, except for one. A single figure remained standing, perhaps 20 feet away from me. Unlike the others, this one hadn't returned to its grave. It simply stood there, watching me with its empty sockets, its skull tilted at an inquisitive angle. I recognized the remnants of the suit. This was the figure who had drawn on my window. "Why are you still here?" I asked. It raised one skeletal hand and pointed, not at me, past me, toward the mausoleum. I turned. The building looked the same as always. Weathered marble, sealed door, no trace of the miraculous light that had poured from within. But as I stared at it, I noticed something I'd never seen before. An inscription above the door, barely visible beneath decades of grime. 守护者在此安息. I didn't recognize the language, but the meaning bloomed in my mind with the same unexplained certainty as before. The guardian rests here. When I turned back, the figure was gone. The cemetery was truly empty now. I checked my phone. 5:47 a.m. My shift ended at 6. The sky was already lightening in the east, gray dawn dissolving the last remnants of fog. I walked to the gates on unsteady legs and unlocked them, stepping out into the parking lot, where my car waited. Everything looked normal. The world hadn't changed. But I had. I returned to work the next night, and the night after that. The cemetery remained peaceful, as it had for the first 3 months of my employment. No more rising bodies. No more searching souls. Just silence and stone and the patient sleep of the dead. But sometimes, when fog rolls in thick and low, I see a figure standing near the mausoleum. Always the same one, in its remnant suit, watching me with empty eyes. It never approaches. It never communicates. It simply watches. Guarding, waiting. I don't know. I've tried to research the mausoleum's history to understand what happened that October night. The records are incomplete, contradictory. Some suggest it was built by a Chinese immigrant family in the 1800s. Others claim it predates the cemetery itself, that it was already here when the land was consecrated. The inscription remains a mystery. I've found no one who can translate those specific characters or explain their presence on a New England tomb. What I do know is this: something about that night changed me. I feel it in quiet moments, a sense of expanded awareness, as if I exist slightly outside my own body. Sometimes I hear whispers in languages I don't speak. Sometimes I see light where there should be only darkness. Not the silvery fountain from the mausoleum, but smaller glimmers, like fireflies hovering near certain graves. The doctor says I'm healthy. The therapist suggests stress and sleep deprivation. My friends notice nothing unusual. But I know that when I stepped into that light, when I became a bridge between the separated and the whole, something of those souls remained within me. Or perhaps something of me went with them. I still work the night shift at Rosemont Cemetery. I still walk the paths between weathered headstones, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. But now I wonder what else lies beneath the earth, what other separations exist, what other reunions await. And on foggy October nights, I find myself drawn to the mausoleum, to that sealed door, wondering if it will open again. Wondering if I'll have the courage to step through. Wondering what I might find waiting on the other side. The figure in the suit watches from a distance, patient and eternal. Perhaps it knows. Perhaps it's waiting to see if I'll discover the answer myself. The dead keep their secrets well. But sometimes, on the quietest nights, I think I can hear them whispering, sharing, preparing me for something I don't yet understand. Something that waits in the dark between heartbeats. Something that watches from the space between life and death. Something that knows my name. Story 6. The rain started 20 miles outside of Portland. A light mist that gradually thickened into a steady downpour. I turned the wipers to full speed and hunched forward over the steering wheel, peering through the curtain of water at the highway ahead. It was past midnight. The road was empty except for me and the occasional semi-truck that roared past, throwing up sheets of water that momentarily blinded me. I should have stopped at the last rest area, should have waited out the storm. But I was eager to get home after 3 days at a conference I'd never wanted to attend. My phone sat in the cuff holder useless. No signal out here, and the battery was nearly dead anyway. The radio played only static between stations. I was alone, with the sound of rain hammering the roof and the rhythmic thump of windshield. Wipers struggling to keep up. I'd been driving for about an hour when I saw the first one. Headlights in my rearview mirror, appearing suddenly where moments before there had been only darkness. Not alarming on its own. Other cars used this highway, but something about these lights felt wrong. They were positioned oddly, too far apart, too high off the ground, and they didn't behave like normal headlights. They didn't grow brighter as the vehicle approached, didn't bob and weave with the road's contours. They just appeared, fixed, unwavering. I watched them in the mirror, my hands tightening on the wheel. The lights maintained a constant distance behind me, perhaps 100 yards. When I accelerated, they accelerated. When I slowed, they slowed, always maintaining that exact distance. After several minutes of this, I told myself I was being paranoid. Just another driver heading in the same direction, probably using cruise control. Nothing sinister about that. But then I noticed more lights. To my left, barely visible through the rain, running parallel to the highway through what should have been empty fields. And ahead, on what I thought was the opposite side of the highway. Except the opposite side should have been heading toward Portland, not away from it. I counted 6 sets of headlights. 6 vehicles, all moving in perfect synchronization with my own, all maintaining the same strange, unwavering intensity. The rain intensified. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. I had to slow to 40 miles per hour, then 30. My headlights barely penetrating 5 feet ahead. The other lights slowed with me. I reached for my phone, thinking maybe I had enough battery to call someone, to have another human voice, even if they couldn't help. But the phone was completely dead now, its screen black and unresponsive. I hadn't noticed it die. Hadn't heard the shutdown chime. My dashboard lights flickered. Just once, but enough to notice. The radio crackled. And through the static I heard something that might have been a voice. too distorted to understand, but it had the rhythm of speech, of someone trying to communicate. I punched the radio off. The silence that followed felt oppressive, broken only by rain and wipers and the steady hum of my engine. The lights behind me moved closer, not gradually, suddenly, like they'd teleported forward. Now they were only 50 yards back. I could see more detail. The shape behind the lights was wrong. Too boxy, too tall, like a vehicle from a different era, a different reality. I pressed the accelerator, my heart hammering. My car surged forward, struggling against the rain, slicked road. The speedometer climbed to 50, 60, 70 miles per hour. Dangerously fast in these conditions, but I couldn't help it. Something primal in my hindbrain was screaming at me to run. The lights followed, effortlessly, all of them, moving in that perfect synchronization, now forming a loose circle around my position. Behind, beside, ahead. Though how they could be ahead of me when I'd seen the road empty just moments ago, I couldn't explain. My headlights flickered, dimmed. For a moment I was driving through absolute darkness. Only the glow from my dashboard showing me the speedometer still climbing, still registering speed, even though I couldn't see the road. Then the lights returned, and I saw them. Not cars. Not vehicles in any conventional sense. The shapes behind those headlights were wrong, angular and flowing at the same time, shifting between forms, made of something that wasn't quite metal and wasn't quite flesh. They had the suggestion of windshields, but what lay behind the glass wasn't driver seats and steering wheels. It was darkness. Absolute darkness. Somehow more present than the absence of light around it. I slammed on the brakes. The car hydroplaned, fishtailing across the wet highway. I wrestled with the wheel, managed to bring it under control, came to a shuddering stop on the shoulder. The lights stopped too, surrounding me now, forming a perfect circle, perhaps 20 yards in diameter, with my car at the center. My engine died. The sudden silence was worse than any sound could have been. No rain. I could still see it falling, still see it striking my windshield, but I couldn't hear it. No wind, no breathing. Just absolute, suffocating quiet. I tried to restart the engine. The key turned uselessly. No click, no grinding, nothing. Like the car had become a hollow shell. Its mechanical heart simply gone. Movement in my peripheral vision. I turned my head slowly, afraid of what I'd see. The vehicles, if that's what they were, had begun to change. Their shapes rippled like water, solidifying into new forms. Some became older models, cars from the 60s and 70s, with their distinctive profiles and chrome accents. Others became more modern, sleek shapes that wouldn't look out of place on a current dealership lot. But all of them shared that fundamental wrongness, that sense of being shells, wrapped around something that shouldn't exist. One by one, their doors opened. Nothing emerged. The doors just swung wide, revealing interiors that made my eyes water when I tried to focus on them. Seats that were and weren't. Dashboard configurations that changed as I watched. spaces that seemed deeper than the vehicle's exterior dimensions should allow. And from each open door came that darkness, pouring out like liquid, pooling on the wet highway, spreading toward my car. I locked the doors. A useless gesture, but some part of my brain needed the action, needed to feel like I was doing something. The darkness continued its approach, slow and deliberate, like it had all the time in the world. When it reached my car, I expected it to flow around the vehicle, to find gaps in the seals, to seep inside. But it didn't. It simply stopped at the edge, lapping against my tires like gentle waves. Waiting. The radio crackled to life, though I hadn't turned it on. Through the static came that voice again, clearer now. Not speaking English. Not speaking any language I recognized. But somehow, impossibly, I understood it. Going somewhere. I didn't answer. Couldn't. My throat had gone dry, my tongue heavy in my mouth. We've been driving these roads for a very long time. The voice continued. It sounded male, but also female, but also neither. Multiple voices layered over each other, speaking in imperfect unison. Waiting for the right conditions. The right storm. The right traveler. What do you want? I managed to croak. Want. The voice seemed amused. Such a human question. We don't want anything. We simply are. We drive because driving is what we do. We follow because following is our nature. We circle because prey that stops running is prey that's ready to be taken. I'm not prey, aren't you? Alone on an empty highway. No witnesses. No help. Your vehicle dead, surrounded by things you can't understand and can't escape. The voices chuckled, a sound like gravel sliding down metal. You became prey the moment you drove into our territory. This is a public highway. Eyes it. Look around. Really look. What do you see? I looked. The highway stretched in both directions, identical in every way to how it had looked before. Wet asphalt, painted lines, the occasional reflector post. But now that the voice had pointed it out, I noticed the absence. No mile markers, no exit signs, no variation in the landscape at all. Just endless highway cutting through endless darkness. We're not on the highway anymore, I whispered. Oh, you're still on a highway. Just not the one you thought you were driving. There are roads beneath roads, paths beneath paths, places where the asphalt grows thin and other routes bleed through. You slip between them when the rain got heavy and visibility dropped. It happens sometimes. To certain people, on certain nights. How do I get back? Back. The voices laughed properly now, a chorus of mirth that held no warmth. Why would you want to go back? Your life there was what? Comfortable. Predictable. Boring. Here you have us. We're fascinating. We're unknown. We're the most interesting thing that will ever happen to you. You're going to kill me. Eventually. But not yet. First, you have to drive. Before I could ask what that meant, my engine roared to life. I hadn't turned the key. Hadn't touched anything. But the car was running, idling smooth and steady, as if it had never stopped. The headlights of the surrounding vehicles extinguished. One by one, like candles being blown out. The darkness that had pooled around my car withdrew, flowing back into those impossible interiors. Doors closed with soft clicks, and then the vehicles began to drive. Not away, but in a circle around me, maintaining their formation. Slow at first, then faster. Their headlights remained off, but I could see them anyway. Shapes moving through the rain, visible as absences rather than presences. My car began to move too. I wasn't steering. My hands rested on the wheel, but it turned itself. Following the curve of the circle the other vehicles had established. My foot wasn't on the accelerator, but the car maintained a steady speed, matching the pace of the things around me. "What are you doing?" I demanded. "Teaching you the route," the voices replied through my dead radio. "Every driver who joins us must learn the route, must understand the patterns, must become part of the circuit. I'm not joining you. You already have. The moment you stopped running, you accepted. The moment you locked your doors instead of fleeing on foot, you chose the vehicle over your own body. You value this metal shell, so now you get to keep it. Forever." The circle tightened. The vehicles moved closer, their trajectories spiraling inward. I tried to turn the wheel, to break free of the pattern, but my hands might as well have been welded in place. The car refused to respond to my will. "Don't fight it," the voices advised. "Fighting only makes the transition more painful. Accept what you're becoming. You're not the first. You won't be the last. What am I becoming? One of us? A driver of the empty roads. A follower of the endless route. A hunter of solitary travelers who make the mistake of driving through storms at midnight." The spiral continued to tighten. The vehicles were close enough now that I could have reached out and touched them if I'd been willing to open my window. Close enough that I could see details I'd missed before. Rusted metal that somehow still gleamed. Broken windshields that were somehow still intact. And behind every windshield, shapes that might have been drivers, might have been passengers, might have been the dissolved remnants of people who'd made the same mistake I had. "How many of you are there?" I asked. We lose count. New ones join when the conditions are right. Old ones fade when they forget their names, their histories, their human origins. We are a collective, a fleet, a ghost convoy traveling roads that don't exist on any map. Someone will notice I'm missing. They'll search for me. They'll search the highway you were on. Not this one. These roads exist in the gaps, in the spaces between. Your car will be found eventually. Empty, engine cold, no signs of struggle. Just another mysterious disappearance. Another cautionary tale about driving alone at night. My car completed another rotation. The spiral had tightened to the point where I could see individual scratches. On the vehicles beside me, battle scars from years of driving nowhere. Decades, centuries perhaps, and then I noticed something else. On the vehicle to my left, a pickup truck from the 1940s, its paint oxidized to a mottled gray, blue. I could see a bumper sticker, faded barely legible, but I could just make out the words. Weloluesto RBUST. Someone had driven this truck to Yellowstone once, or had been planning to. Had loaded up supplies and hope and the excitement of an adventure. And somewhere along the way, they'd taken a wrong turn. Had driven into a storm. Had found themselves on roads that didn't lead anywhere but back to themselves. Let me out, I said quietly.
No.
Please. You don't understand yet. Soon you will. Soon you'll realize that this is better. Out there, in your old life, you were going nowhere. Day after day of the same routines, same disappointments, same slow decay toward death. Here, you're always moving, always driving. The road never ends, which means you never have to arrive. Never have to face the emptiness of reaching your destination and finding nothing waiting. That's insane. Is it? Or is it the only sane response to existence? To keep moving, keep driving. Never stop long enough to think about the pointlessness of it all. The vehicle's headlights blazed to life simultaneously. Brilliant white light that seared my vision, forcing me to look away. When I could see again, the spiral had broken. The vehicles were falling back, establishing that 100-yard distance. And ahead, emerging from the rain like a ship from fog, I saw a rest stop. It looked normal. Fluorescent lights, parking spaces. A small building that probably housed bathrooms and vending machines. But it existed on this wrong highway, which meant it couldn't truly be normal. Your choice, the voices said. Stop and rest, or keep driving with us. Either way, you're not leaving. Either way, you're ours now. My car's steering returned to my control. I could feel the wheel respond to my touch again, the accelerator pressing back against my foot. The illusion of agency restored. I approached the rest stop slowly. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, that stopping would be worse than continuing. But I was exhausted, terrified. I needed a moment to think, to process, to figure out if there was any way out of this nightmare. I pulled into a parking space. My engine died the moment I shifted into park. Through the windshield, I could see the rest stop building. Lights on inside. Everything looking perfectly ordinary, except for the other cars in the parking lot. 6 of them arranged in a semi-circle facing my vehicle. Empty. Their headlights dark. Their interiors shadowed. Waiting, I sat in my car for what might have been minutes or hours. Time felt unstable here, elastic. The rain continued to fall, and I realized I still couldn't hear it. The silence pressed against my eardrums like cotton wool. Finally, I opened my door. The rain was warm, too warm. It smelled wrong, not like fresh rain, but like something old and stagnant. Water that had been sitting too long in a closed container. It ran down my face in oily rivulets, and I had to fight the urge to wipe it away, knowing that touching it would only make it worse. I walked toward the rest stop building. The pavement felt spongy beneath my feet, yielding in ways asphalt shouldn't. My footsteps made no sound. The building's door opened at my approach, swinging inward on hinges that didn't squeak. Inside, Fluorescent lights hummed their eternal drone. The floor was clean, but somehow dirty. Shining, but covered with a film I could sense more than see. 2 vending machines stood against one wall. A water fountain between them. A hallway leading to bathrooms. Everything exactly as it should be. Exactly as hundreds of rest stops along hundreds of highways appeared. But when I looked at the vending machines, I saw that the snacks inside were wrong. Packages I didn't recognize, with labels in languages that shifted when I tried to read them. Candy bars wrapped in colors that didn't quite exist. Chips in flavors like nostalgia and regret. And the moment before. I turned to leave and found someone standing behind me. Not one of the vehicle things. An actual person. A woman, maybe 60, wearing clothes from the 1980s. Big hair, shoulder pads. Acid-washed jeans. She looked tired. Infinitely tired. Like she hadn't slept in decades. "How long have you been here?" she asked. Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "I don't know. An hour. Maybe? No. I mean, how long on the roads? The ones between. I just got here. Tonight? Less than an hour ago." She laughed bitterly. "Lucky you. Still fresh. Still remember what real rain sounds like." She moved to the vending machine, pressed buttons in a sequence that meant nothing to me. A candy bar dropped. She picked it up but didn't open it. "I've been here since 1987, March 15th, 1987. I remember the date because it was my daughter's birthday. I was driving home from buying her present." 38 years, I whispered. "Is that how long it's been?" I lose track. Days blend together when you're always driving. Always following the road. Always searching for exits that don't exist. She finally looked at me directly, and her eyes held a depth of sorrow I'd never seen in another human being. "You can't escape. I've tried. God, how I've tried. But the roads always loop back. The route always continues. And every time you think you've found a way out, you discover it was just another turn in the circuit. There has to be a way. If there is, I haven't found it. Neither has anyone else who's ended up here. And there are a lot of us. More every year. Or what feels like years. Time is strange on these roads. What about them?" I gestured toward the parking lot. The things driving the vehicles. "Those aren't things. Those are us. What we become when we finally stop fighting. When we accept that this is all there is now. Driving and circling and hunting for new drivers to join the fleet." She unwrapped the candy bar slowly, her movements mechanical. I can feel it happening to me. A little more each day or week, or whatever unit of time actually passes. Soon I'll forget my daughter's name, then my own name, then what it felt like to be human. And then I'll be one of them, circling some poor traveler on a rainy night, herding them toward the moment of choice. Choice. Stop or keep driving, rest or run. Either way you stay, either way you join. It's just a question of how long you hold on to yourself before the roads erase you. She took a bite of the candy bar, chewed mechanically. I keep eating these. Don't know why. Haven't felt hungry in years. but it's something to do. Something that feels human. I backed away from her, my mind reeling. I'm not staying. I refuse. Everyone says that at first. No, you don't understand. My life might not be perfect, but it's mine. I have people waiting for me, things I need to do. I'm not giving up. Then run, she said simply. Run into the rain. Leave your car behind. See how far you get. Will it work? No. But you won't believe me until you try. I ran. Out of the building, past my car, across the parking lot, and onto the wet highway. My shoes slapped against pavement that felt more and more like rubber with each step. The rain soaked me instantly. That too, warm, oily rain that smelled of stagnation. Behind me, engines roared to life. Headlights blazed. The hunt had begun. I ran faster than I'd ever run, pumping my arms, my lungs burning. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, no curves, no exits, just straight line cutting through darkness. I could hear the vehicles behind me, or I thought I could. Though, maybe it was just my imagination filling the silence with appropriate sounds. I ran until my legs gave out. Collapsed on the wet pavement, gasping, my vision swimming. When I looked back, the vehicles had stopped. They formed a line across the highway, blocking any return path. Their headlights illuminated me where I lay. And beyond them, perhaps a quarter-mile back, I could see the rest stop. Still in sight, despite running at full speed for what felt like 10 minutes. I'd barely covered any distance at all. The woman from the rest stop walked toward me. Not hurrying, just a steady, measured pace. When she reached me, she extended a hand to help me up. "Told you," she said, not unkindly. "The roads don't let go." I took her hand because I had no other choice. She pulled me to my feet, and we stood together on the highway that led nowhere, in the rain that wasn't really rain, surrounded by vehicles that weren't really vehicles. "What now?" I asked. "Now you choose. You can keep running, keep fighting, wear yourself out trying to find exits that don't exist. Or you can get back in your car and drive. Join the circuit. Accept what you've become." She squeezed my hand once, then let go. I chose to fight. 38 years of fighting, and I'm so tired. But you're younger than I was. Stronger, maybe. Who knows? Maybe you'll be the one who figures it out. Figures what out? Why we're really here. What these roads actually are. What we're meant to learn. She smiled sadly. If there's a purpose to this, I haven't found it yet. But maybe that's my failure. Not the roads. She walked back toward the rest stop, growing smaller in the distance, until the rain and darkness swallowed her completely. I stood alone on the highway. The vehicles waited, patient, eternal. They would wait as long as necessary. Time meant nothing to them anymore. I thought about my life back in the real world, my small apartment, my job that paid bills but didn't inspire, my friends who I saw once every few months, my family who I called on holidays. Was it really so different from this? An endless cycle, routes I traveled without thinking, destinations that ultimately meant nothing. No, that was the roads talking. That was the voice from the radio, trying to convince me that surrender was wisdom. My life might have been imperfect, but it was real. It had meaning beyond simple motion. It had growth, change, the possibility of something better. I walked back to my car, not because I was accepting, but because I needed shelter, needed time to think, needed to formulate a plan. The vehicles didn't move as I passed them. They simply watched, their dark windshields reflecting nothing. I got in my car and locked the doors. Still a useless gesture, but one that made me feel slightly more in control. The interior smelled like it always had, a mix of old coffee and the vanilla air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror. Normal smells, real smells, reminders of the world I'd left behind. The radio crackled. You came back. I needed to think. Think all you want. The conclusion is always the same. You're here now. You're part of the circuit. Fighting it only prolongs the inevitable. What if I just stay here, in the parking lot? Never drive again. You'll starve, or go mad, or both. The roads require motion. That's their fundamental nature. Stand still too long, and they'll erase you completely. At least if you drive, you maintain some form of existence. I looked at the dashboard. My fuel gauge read half full. In the real world, that meant another 200 miles or so. But in this place, on these roads, who knew if fuel meant anything at all? How far does the circuit go? I asked. Depends on who's driving it. For some, it's a small loop. For others, it spans thousands of miles. You create your own circuit through the choices you make, the turns you take, the routes you follow. And if I choose not to turn, if I just drive straight, there is no straight on these roads. Every path curves, every route loops. Didn't you learn anything from running? I had learned. I'd learned that distance was meaningless here, that the landscape repeated itself, that no matter how far I traveled, I'd end up back where I started. But there had to be something I was missing. Some detail, some clue, some escape route that everyone else had overlooked. Because I refused to believe that all those people, the woman from the 1980s, the driver of the Yellowstone truck, the dozens or hundreds or thousands of others who'd been trapped here, I refused to believe they were all simply unlucky, that there was no pattern, no reason, no way out. I started my engine. It caught immediately, purring smooth and steady. Good, the voices said. Accept, drive, join. I'm not joining, I said quietly. I'm investigating. I pulled out of the parking space and back onto the highway. The other vehicles fell into formation behind me, maintaining that perfect 100-yard distance. Their headlights remained dark, but I could sense them there, following, watching, waiting for the moment when I'd give up and become one of them. I drove slowly, studying everything I passed. The roadside was empty of features, no trees, no signs, no mile markers, no variation at all. Just endless highway bordered by darkness. But the darkness wasn't uniform. If I looked carefully, I could see variations in its density. Patterns in the void. After what might have been an hour of driving, I saw it. a place where the darkness seemed thinner, less absolute. As I passed, I caught a glimpse of something beyond. Lights, maybe, or stars, or reflections of something that existed outside this pocket reality. "What was that?" I asked the radio. Silence. "What was that?" I repeated. "I saw something. A thin place." "You saw nothing," the voices finally replied, but there was a hesitation in them, uncertainty. "Keep driving. There are weak spots," I said, understanding dawning. Places where this reality borders the real one. Where the roads get confused about which side they're on. Even if there were, you couldn't reach them. The circuit maintains itself. The vehicles ensure compliance. But you can't control where I drive. Only that I drive. You admitted that. I create my own circuit through my choices. You're wasting time with false hope. Maybe. Or maybe I'm the first person to actually pay attention instead of just panicking. I drove on, now watching carefully for those thin places. They appeared irregularly, sometimes miles apart, sometimes closer together. Each one showed a fragment of the real world. A streetlight, a road sign, a glimpse of actual rain falling through actual air under an actual sky. The vehicles behind me began to accelerate. Their headlights flickered on, harsh and bright, trying to distract me. The radio blared static so loud, it made my ears ring. My steering wheel jerked in my hands, trying to pull me back to the center of the highway, away from the edges where the thin places appeared. I fought them, gripped the wheel with white, knuckled hands, and aimed for the next thin place I saw. A spot where the darkness seemed almost translucent, where I could clearly see a real highway with real road markings under real stars. "You can't?" The voices screamed through the static. "The barriers hold. The separation is absolute. You're trapped here with us forever." But their fear gave me hope. If there was nothing to fear, they wouldn't be trying so hard to stop me. I aimed my car directly at the thin place and pressed the accelerator to the floor. The vehicles behind me surged forward, no longer maintaining their distance. They rushed at me from all sides, trying to force me away from the spot I'd targeted. But I held steady, my car screaming forward at speeds it had never reached before. The thin place grew larger. I could see through it now. A real highway, empty at this late hour, rain falling naturally from real clouds. Freedom, escape, return, impact. My car hit the barrier between realities like hitting a wall of water. There was resistance, enormous, crushing pressure that made my bones ache and my vision blur. I felt my car beginning to come apart, panels warping, glass cracking, engine screaming in protest. But I kept pressure on the accelerator, kept pushing forward, kept fighting against the resistance that wanted to trap me in the nowhere roads forever. Behind me, the pursuing vehicles collided with the barrier and simply stopped, as if they'd hit an invisible wall. I saw them through my cracked rearview mirror, piling up, their forms beginning to dissolve like smoke in wind. And then, with a sensation like passing through a membrane, I was through. Real rain hammered my car. Real wind buffeted it. The highway stretched ahead of me with real mile markers and real exit signs. My radio played actual music, a country song I half recognized. My phone buzzed in the co-folder. Signal restored, messages downloading. I eased off the accelerator, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. Pulled onto the shoulder and sat there, gasping. My heart hammering, unable to quite believe I'd made it out. A semi-truck roared past, throwing up spray that coated my windshield. Normal, real, solid. I looked in my rearview mirror. The highway behind me stretched into the distance, lit by my taillights. No pursuing vehicles. No impossible geometry. Just normal road under a normal rainy sky. But as I watched, I saw something that made my blood freeze. In the distance, barely visible, a set of headlights appeared. And another. And another. 6 vehicles, maintaining perfect formation, approaching slowly. They were still out there. Still following. Still hunting. The radio crackled. Through normal music came that layered voice, distant now but still audible. You didn't escape. You just delayed. We know your car now. Know its signature. Know its rhythm. We'll find you again on some future rainy night when you're tired and alone, when the visibility drops and the roads grow uncertain. We'll be waiting. The headlights in my mirror maintained their distance, not approaching, not retreating, just following. Waiting, I pulled back onto the highway and drove toward the nearest town, toward lights and people and the illusion of safety. The 6 sets of headlights followed, always maintaining that 100-yard distance, always watching. When I finally pulled into a 24-hour diner, they stopped at the edge of the parking lot, arranged themselves in that familiar semi-circle, and waited. I went inside, ordered coffee I couldn't taste, and sat by the window watching them. The waitress asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine, just tired from driving. She accepted the lie. Hours passed. Other customers came and went. None of them noticed the vehicles waiting in the parking lot. None of them seemed to see the darkness that surrounded them, the way reality bent slightly in their presence. Maybe they couldn't see them. Maybe only those who'd driven the nowhere roads could perceive the fleet. Dawn came eventually. The rain stopped, and as sunlight broke through the clouds, the vehicles simply vanished. One moment they were there, the next they were gone, leaving no trace of their presence. I stayed in the diner until noon, drinking coffee, trying to process what had happened, trying to decide what to do next. I couldn't go to the police. They'd think I was insane. Couldn't tell my friends or family. They'd worry, or worse, they'd think I'd had some kind of breakdown. I was alone with this knowledge, alone with the understanding that something impossibly wrong existed just beneath the surface of normal reality. And I knew, with sickening certainty, that the voice had been right. I hadn't truly escaped. I'd just postponed. Those vehicles would be waiting for the next rainy night, the next moment of vulnerability, the next time I found myself alone on an empty highway. I would have to be careful. Would have to avoid driving at night. Would have to stay alert, watch for the signs. Recognize when the roads were beginning to slip between realities. Or I could stop driving entirely, sell my car. Take buses, trains, anything but personal vehicles. But even as I thought it, I knew it wouldn't work. The nowhere roads had marked me. They knew me now, and sooner or later, they would find a way to pull me back. I left the diner as the afternoon sun painted everything in warm, ordinary light. Got in my car, my familiar, normal, slightly battered car, and sat behind the wheel. Hands resting in the positions they'd held for years. A piece of paper lay on the passenger seat. I hadn't put it there. It was folded once, and when I opened it, I found a hand-drawn map. Not of real roads, but of the nowhere roads. The circuit I'd driven. The thin places I'd found. And at the bottom, written in handwriting that wasn't mine, you saw the way through. Others need to see it too. Return and show them. Guide them home. Or forget you were ever lost and spend your life looking over your shoulder. I stared at the map for a long time, at the choice it represented. I could pretend last night never happened, could try to go back to my normal life and hope the vehicles never found me again. Or I could accept what I'd learned, could become something new, not a victim, not prey, but perhaps a guide. Someone who knew the way through the darkness because I'd traveled it myself. I folded the map carefully and placed it in my glove compartment. I didn't know yet which choice I would make. Maybe I wouldn't know until the next rainy night, the next moment of decision. But I drove home carefully, watching the road, staying alert. And every time I saw headlights in my rearview mirror, my heart skipped a beat, wondering if they were real or if the hunt had resumed. The roads remember, the vehicles wait, and somewhere in the spaces between realities, a fleet of impossible drivers circles endlessly, searching for the next traveler who'll make the mistake of driving alone through a storm. I made it through. But the question that haunts me now is for how long, and if they come for me again. When they come for me again, will I run? Or will I remember that map, remember that choice, and decide that maybe being a guide through the darkness is better than being hunted by it? The rain will come again. It always does. And when it falls, thick and warm and wrong, I'll have to decide who I want to be. Prey or protector. Victim or guide. Lost or found. The roads will decide which answer they accept. And until then, I drive carefully. I watch my mirrors. I avoid storms when I can. And I carry that map, folded small, a reminder that escape is possible, but never permanent. That knowledge comes with responsibility. That sometimes the only way through darkness is to return to it with light. The nowhere roads are patient. They've waited forever. They can wait a little longer. But so can I. Story 7. I never believed the stories about the statue until that night when everything changed. It stood in Riverside Park for 37 years. A life-sized copper figure of Marcus Holloway, the industrialist who built this city. His right hand pointed toward the horizon, His left held a pocket watch frozen at 3 o'clock. Children used to climb on its base until the city added those ornamental iron railings. I'd walked past it countless times without really seeing it, the way you stop noticing things that have always been there. The rain started around midnight. I remember because I checked my phone, wondering if I should call a cab instead of walking home through the park. I was tired from the conference. My presentation hadn't gone well, and I wanted to disappear into my apartment and pretend the day had never happened. So I walked. Stupid, maybe, but I wasn't thinking clearly. That's when I first noticed the change in the statue. It wasn't dramatic. Nothing I could point to and say definitively that something was different. It was more like that nagging feeling when you enter a room and know someone has moved something, but you can't quite identify what. The copper figure seemed closer to the path than I remembered, though logically I knew the railings hadn't moved. It's patina, usually a deep green from decades of oxidation, looked almost wet in the streetlight's glow, as though the rain had restored some of its original shine. I almost kept walking. Should have kept walking. But there was something about the positioning of his left hand, the one holding the watch. It had been extended outward in my memory, a gesture suggesting the passage of time, progress, momentum. Now it hung lower, almost as if he was showing it to me personally, inviting me to observe that frozen moment. 3 o'clock. Always 3 o'clock. I've worked in finance for 15 years. Detail is my trade. Numbers, facts, documented evidence. And yet, what I'm about to describe exists in that uncomfortable space where certainty becomes unreliable. The statue's eyes moved, not quickly. Nothing cinematic or impossible. Just a slow, grinding rotation of the head, copper against the rust that had accumulated in its joints over decades. The scraping sound it made was like chalk on a blackboard, but deeper, more resonant. It echoed across the empty park. I felt it vibrate through my chest. I should have run. Why didn't I run? You, it said. The voice came like groaning metal, like the death rattle of old machinery. I know you. My mind offered rational explanations. A homeless person hiding behind the statue. A prank. A stress-induced hallucination. But none of these explanations survived the next moment when I watched the copper patina crack and shift as the statue's mouth opened wider, impossibly wide, to produce that voice. I was watching from up here, it continued, when you and your colleagues came to the park 5 years ago. I felt my stomach compress into a tight fist. 5 years. There had been a night 5 years ago. The summer internship program. We'd gone to the park with the junior staff, and there had been an incident. Something I'd worked very hard to forget. Then harder still to convince myself had been exaggerated in my memory. I watched her crying on that bench. The statue said, still facing me, though its body remained rigid. Only the head moved. I watched while you all laughed and filmed her with your phones. I watched the way you touched her shoulder and whispered in her ear. telling her it was her fault. I have watched. I have always been watching. The rain intensified, drumming against the metal figure, and I realized it wasn't rain anymore. It was something else. Something that sounded like static, like 1,000 whispered voices overlapping. "Where is she?" I asked, my voice barely recognizable to my own ears. "Everywhere," the statue replied. "And nowhere. Time has stopped at 3 o'clock in my hand, and in that eternal moment, she remains. She has always remained." I looked down at the frozen watch face, and in that split second, I swear I saw the hour hand move. Just slightly. Just enough to indicate that time, somehow, was beginning to progress again. The numbers on the face seemed to writhe and shift. When I looked back up, the statue's expression had changed. Its mouth was twisted now in something that might have been a smile, or might have been a rictus of rage. "I cannot move from here," it said. "This metal binds me, but the night does not bind me. And the night, you see, extends far beyond this park." That's when I noticed the shadows. They shouldn't have existed. The park's lighting was consistent enough that shadows fell in predictable directions. But these shadows moved of their own accord, sliding across paths and grass without corresponding to any object or light source. They pooled and gathered, and within them I could see shapes, suggestions of forms that might have been human, might have been something else entirely. I tried to leave. My legs moved through the necessary motions, but the park had become disorienting. The path I'd walked 1,000 times before seemed to bend and fold. The exit that should have been 200 feet away kept receding, no matter how quickly I moved. Behind me, I could hear the grinding of metal, more pronounced now, as if the statue wasn't just moving its head, but beginning to shift its entire mass against its own joints. When I finally reached the park's edge, or perhaps when it finally released me, dawn was starting to break. My phone showed 4:47 a.m. I'd been in the park for less than an hour, though it felt like much longer, or shorter. Time had become unreliable. I didn't go to work that day, or the next. I called in, citing illness, which was technically true. My apartment felt different after that night. I began noticing things I'd overlooked before. Photographs on the wall that I couldn't quite remember taking. Books in my bookshelf I had no memory of purchasing. Coffee cups in the sink that suggested a life more lived than I recalled. The worst part was the feeling of being watched. Not dramatic surveillance, but the subtle sensation of attention. I'd catch movements in reflective surfaces. Windows, mirrors, the glass on my television. Someone or something was there in my peripheral vision, just outside the range of direct observation. I learned that the girl, Jessica Chen, I finally let myself remember her name, had left the city 6 months after that night. She'd taken her own life in another state, in a city where nobody knew her, away from the place where she'd been humiliated. The news article I found was 3 years old. I'd never known. We'd simply moved on with our careers, our lives, our ambitious plans. on the 7th night after my encounter, I decided to walk back to the park. I'm not sure why. Perhaps compulsion. Perhaps curiosity. Perhaps something else was drawing me there. The statue was gone. Not removed, erased. The base remained. The old placard still bolted to the stone, but the copper figure itself had vanished. The ground beneath it was unmarked, suggesting nothing had ever stood there at all. When I touched the cold stone, my fingertips came away with a faint copper residue. But it might have been my imagination. That night, I dreamed of 3 o'clock. I watched the hour hand on every clock in my dreams slide toward 4. In the dream, I was standing in the park, and when the hand moved, I felt a physical sensation, a shifting, a reordering of something fundamental. When I woke, my wristwatch, which I never wore, had appeared on my nightstand. The hands were frozen at 3 o'clock. I haven't returned to the park since that night. I've also begun attending therapy. Though I haven't told my therapist about the statue or the night or any of the things I've experienced since then. How do you explain that you might be haunted? That the city itself might be complicit in some form of judgment? That the things we do in moments of cruelty might create a weight that accumulates, pressing down through years and decades until something has to give way? Jessica Chen appears in my dreams now, or the idea of her does. She never speaks. She simply stands at the periphery watching, the way the statue watched. And every time I wake from these dreams, something in my apartment has moved. A book turned backward on the shelf. A mirror adjusted slightly. A photograph facing the wall that had been facing me before. Sometimes I stand at my window at night and look out toward the park, searching for the statue. It's not there, I know. But I see shadows that move with intention, and in those shadows, I imagine I can discern a colored figure standing perfectly still, its hand extended downward, showing me the watch. The hands have moved now. They read 4:37. I don't know what happens when they reach tomorrow. And with that, our time tonight comes to an end. To everyone who stayed until the very last moment, thank you. Truly, having you here sharing these shadows makes the darkness feel a little less empty. I'm grateful you chose to spend a piece of your night here with me. I hope these stories brought you that quiet shiver, the kind that makes you feel alive. There's something special about this, all of us, connected by the love of a good story, whispered in the dark. I'll be back soon with more echoes from the void, more mysteries waiting to be told. Until then, rest well, sleep deeply, and if you hear footsteps that shouldn't be there, just remember they're only stories. Oh, and before you drift off, if you enjoyed our time together, a like and a subscribe will make sure we meet again, somewhere in the dark. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.